Chromakopia.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And we are coming at you with a very, very special episode, talking about a discography. We haven't done one of these this year just because we've been so all over the place and uploading has been but because of the new release from a particularly big artist, I'd say it's probably the last true banner release of the year. To wrap things up, we're talking today about the discography of the enfant terrible of the Odd Future crew. We're going to be talking about Tyler, the Creator. And because I, in the past, have expressed my love for Mr. the Creator, and my podcast mates, for the most part, are not really in that same camp as me, I have recruited, of course, my fellow Kentucky Thembo, Jen, to come and talk to me and expound upon our relationship with Mr. Tyler, the creator, a one Mr. Tyler Okonma, if we're going to get technical about things.
Yeah. I actually saw Tyler on the Call Me If You Get Lost tour when he did Forecastle. Rest in peace.
Amazing tour.
Rest in peace, Forecastle. But yeah, awesome show. But we're gonna get to that album in a bit.
Mhm.
We're gonna start at the top, and we're not gonna do as much of the Odd Future stuff, although I think it's interesting to bring it up a little bit for historical context
Oh,
of
yeah.
when Tyler, the creator, was first coming up. He was part of a collective called Odd Future. Its membership also included Earl Sweatshirt, although I believe he was using a different name at the time, Frank Ocean, Steve Lacy, among others.
Domo
And
Genesis, Sid from the internet. Like there's so many different pieces of late 2000s and early 2010s sort of like ephemera that is just like inextricably linked to this particular point in time and also kind of embodies a strange phenomena where like this collective for a little while, and I think I wonder if you'll be able to speak to this too. These guys were like everywhere for a couple of years. Like when they first started, those years in like 2010 to 2012, that's when I remember seeing kids on my bus wearing Odd Future merch. I remember people talking about Tyler the Creator before I even knew anything about hip hop, like at all. And just like I remember, I think the Yonkers music video was probably my first introduction to Tyler, just because everybody was like, dude, look at this music video where this guy eats a
same
cockroach. And I'm
here.
like, yeah,
Classic.
I remember going into my school's cafeteria and then everybody like crowded around one of the tables, like watching that on their iPod Touch on the original version of the YouTube app. And I remember watching that and being like, ew, gross. I sort of relegated Tyler and Odd Future to associate them with a kind of, for lack of a better way of putting it, a very white, suburban, kind of edgy sort of. And to be fair, the group very much played into this. They took a lot from groups like 3 6 Mafia and like, that like slightly horrorcore edge to their sound. And they had people like Earl Sweatshirt coming in that could kind of deliver some like more cold flows, but like Odd Future, they were never really like a true blue collective in the sense that they were all like working towards the same thing. I think the biggest sort of precedent Odd Future sets for is in fact Brockhampton, which we have both talked about on this channel before. And I have also mentioned that when we were, discussing the prelude to talk about Tyler and all this stuff, that Odd Future, like the existence of the phrase blanked walked so blank could run was invented so you could say Odd Future walked so Brockhampton could run, which is interesting. You can do a lot of interesting comparisons between the two, but I think the overall, like, to just give important context, is that Odd Future was more about the members and less about the collective and just like what they were doing and what they were like designing fashion wise, because they were a brand out of the gate. They seemed to be a little bit more brand oriented. Like they were all full of very savvy people, and like Brockhampton, they weren't all performers and whatnot. But once like 2010, 2011 dropped around, that was when people started to put out their own solo stuff. Like Frank Ocean was putting out things like the first mixtape that he had. Earl did his first mixtape, but like everybody was kind of crowded around just like seeing what Odd Future were going to do, because people forget that even though they like their stuff hasn't aged super well, like music blogs and journalisms were like all over Odd Future. Like everybody was kind of waiting to see what they did with bated breath. And they released some stuff like compilations, music, like various things, but nothing they have is really like super beloved today, which I think feeds into which is kind of Tyler's first official release, sort of not really, but his what's considered the beginning of a discography is 2009's Bastard, which some of these songs would actually go onto an Odd Future compilation that was released after this, but I feel like this is still is like the moment where everything for everyone in this group truly begins.
Yeah, and Bastard, going back to it is very interesting because I had no idea of Bastard's reputation, and this is my first time listening to it. And what was funny is because I knew that Goblin's reputation kind of precedes it, and nobody
Mm,
really talks about Bastard, but if anything, I find Bastard more challenging to get through than Goblin, even in its performing provocateur nature that Tyler is working in. It feels like it's coming from a more genuine place of like the titular concept, the titular character of the bastard is something
mm.
that's very closely related to Tyler's upbringing, right? And his relationship with his father, which is a subject that permeates through his entire discography, and the exchanges that he has with this auto-tune deep voice character that he makes up called Dr.
Hello there, Tyler.
TC
I'm Dr. TC.
actually feels rooted in the album as a work trying to unfurl some of that psychological push and pull that he has with himself and his wants to like make scare your parents type music to
Hmm.
get the credibility, because that's the interesting thing about Odd Future is that they immediately kind of had this this hipster acceptance in the blogosphere that
Hmm.
was not at all compatible with the attitude that they were bringing to the scene of like it's scare your parents type music. And it's been a long time since I can say I've seen a record, an artist come out of the gate genuinely going for that sort of appeal. And so it's interesting looking back at Bastard and Goblin as projects that are kind of intentionally off-putting and
Hmm.
intentionally abrasive, while also containing, especially in Bastard's case, sounds that to me are inescapable in this lineage of kind of internet rap, which we spend so much of our time talking about. Like we joke that Odd Future as a brand birthed Brockhampton, but also the sound of Bastard birthed so many artists that came afterwards. And I'm thinking in particular, just in the way that he flips I forget what the song is called, but it's something 1971, the song that's on One Beer that he uses
Yeah.
on one of the tracks early on in Bastard's track list. There's that kind of thing going on, but there also is like a very lo-fi drum and bass sound that I feel like defines a lot of the independent internet rap of this era. And especially as we get to some of the middle period of Tyler's discography, there are sounds that he's experimenting with that I can definitely see a link between that and what is really popping off and really succeeding now. And Bastard is where Tyler, not just as his personality, but as a producer, really makes himself known and honestly starts off on a pretty admirable note.
I actually completely agree. I actually wanted to zero in on the first track on here, Bastard, as a sort of focal point because, like, I feel like you can find out so much about Tyler, Odd Future, and this whole scene just by kind of breaking down this one song. And I actually remember, like, going back and going through their catalog and listening to something like this, and I was really immediately kind of captivated by this song, which is weird because, like, overall, I don't think that Bastard is like an incredible song or anything, but what I do find interesting about it is that you can basically isolate every part of it and be like, this became something. This evolved something, and you can track where it went all the way down to Chromacopia if you want to. Like, there's the really bright, saturated strings that are on this beat that are like the wee, 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 that are in the background that kind of like glitter and shimmer, but they're also like, they sound kind of fried, kind of warbled, and there's like a wooziness. Again, it actually does really remind me of the first 3 6 Mafia album, which, if you've listened to it, I mean, it doesn't even sound properly mastered. It barely sounds produced, but this kind of hones that aesthetic into something that's sharp. And what I at least find the most interesting about it is that it's colorful. Like, the content is always kind of darker. It's, it's edgy and all that stuff. But like, I can never describe Tyler's music or Odd Future's music as being monochromatic in any way. At least not right now. And Bastard is interesting just because from the get-go, you have this sort of, well, I mean, the first thing that happens on here is that Tyler tells like some blogosphere people to go fuck themselves. He tells Nardwar to go fuck himself, two dope boys to go fuck themselves. Just because I'm pretty sure Odd Future had beef with them and like trying to put their stuff out to people. Like, who cares? But it's very interesting to see him, like, the first thing he's doing is stirring shit. The first thing he's doing is being a provocateur, which leads into this sort of conversation that he's got with, Dr. TC, where it's, evaluating himself. And the setup is very theatrical, very dark, and it like, just, you can't escape this influence, is that it really feels like Eminem. Tyler is obviously insanely influenced by Eminem, particularly Slim Shady and Marshall Mathers LP Eminem, and channeling that. Except with him, it is very self-consciously taking Eminem's provocateur nature and then channeling it through a troubled, youth who, clearly is struggling with things like suicidal thoughts, with anger issues, with, well, I mean, what would eventually become struggling with a lot of internalized homophobia, which is like, going back and listening to his earlier stuff is like, it's so revealing. Like, not all the time are you able to like piece together an artist's arc as definitively as you can with Tyler, which is why I wanted to talk about him, just because his development as an artist, as a human being, is so like nailed down in this music to the point where, obviously some stuff we didn't know about, you can still see the seeds here. And as such, like, the writing on this song and on this album is the comparison I keep coming back to is that it sounds like Jughead. It sounds like Jughead when he's like, I'm weird. I'm a weirdo. I don't fit in. That's like every bar on Bastard. Like, look at me in the eye
No.
and tell me that this isn't him doing that. But like, his flow is on point. He's technically skilled. He clearly does have a vision for his production. And I don't feel like it's quite captured like, as it's there's no song on here other than Bastard that I feel like feels truly fully formed in the way this does, but you get, like, bits and pieces throughout the whole track list. But Bastard itself really feels like a moment of just like, this does definitely feel like somebody taking their first steps, and they know they're taking their first steps.
Yeah, I mean, it's a guy who knows he's stepping into the limelight. I mean, that's why he starts the album by saying, fuck you, because, yeah, the story goes that he had tried to send some early Odd Future stuff to these blogosphere folks and didn't get any response. And so that was
Hmm.
his way of kind of forcing it. And honestly, it works. Even today, that's kind of a
Yeah.
shocking moment just to hear that right off the bat. To hear an artist be so direct to that kind of critical sphere that he clearly wants to engage with. And I mean, there's a line in Cherry Bomb that I haven't been able to stop thinking about all day, which is basically him saying that he always fucked more with what's it called? The Nerd album that he loves so much. He always fucked
Yeah,
more
yeah,
with that
the
Nerd
Pharrell.
album than Illmatic, right?
Hmm.
He always has had more of a draw to the discourse, right? The
Hmm.
online, the wanting to be experimental, the pushing boundaries and seeing how far you can get with it sort of stuff. And I mean, that's a sentiment that goes through the whole album, but I specifically the one part where I do think the kind of Tyler the Creator project appears fully formed is in the classic track 10 double song VCR and Wheels,
Yeah, yeah.
which is an element that's run through all of Tyler's discography up until Chromacopia, which is that track 10 is always a double song in some way, shape, or form, where
Hmm.
and they've always got some kind of thematic connection to one another. And this one, he shows his hand at being able to do something like that in a really interesting way that he doesn't do in any of the other albums. And so it works as a really strong proof of concept, right? Where it's not inferior to any of the other ones that would come after.
Yeah, and as an album, I feel like this isn't the first time or this is not the last time I will not be saying this. But it does run a little long for what it is, just because this is a very mixtapey feeling project. Like there's about 3 or 4 songs on here that are like, probably don't need to be here. Stuff like Slow It Down featuring Haji, which, I can take or leave, frankly. Same thing with Sarah, Jack and the Beanstalk. A lot of stuff buried in the second half that feel like they just kind of needed to make it around an hour long and just sort of like shoved it all in there. But like, there are points on here where like I think that Domo Genesis is actually a really underrated presence whenever he shows up. I'm kind of disappointed he doesn't have a bigger career just because I really like whenever he features on basically anything. But I really like his contributions to the album that show up here. And Tyler himself, like, again, he's got that really big sort of like husky delivery. Like he's always been really technical and like there is something that is just very admirable about the fact that like I guess it's really just that I've discovered like in the past year like what is it about hip hop that I find the most alluring. And at the end of the day, it's youth. I always tend to prefer albums from artists that are done earliest on in their career when they are, when they're younger, when they're hungry, when they have something to prove and they really just want to come out of the gate swinging, which is why I'm such a big Brockhampton fan. And I see, I can see the vision here with Bastard. And like it's a nice enough time, but at the same time, it's also like I can't listen to this now without also feeling like it's like I've been creatively edged by everyone else in this band and I'm just like, come on, do the thing now. Like actually have Frank Ocean come in and sing the hook on this one or like actually like, give Earl more verses or something. Like I'm always like waiting for them to put in some more alchemy. And it's a very kind of static experience, which is fine. They're obviously still finding their voice, but it is an album that I do feel like it just kind of suffers from the success of its individual members just finding their voice so definitively and so quickly after this.
Is that maybe all we have about Bastard?
I was gonna
I
say
don't know that I
there's really
have
not
much else to
there's
say.
really I'll give it this is that the first half of Tyler's career is interesting and is a bit more divisive even by longtime Tyler fans. Like I am a longtime Tyler fan since 2017, but I also didn't listen to his albums pre-Flower Boy until maybe Call Me If You Get Lost came out, just because there is sort of an understanding there that I mean, we're gonna come up with this comparison a lot when we talk about him, but Tyler's very much like Kanye in that respect, in that he has his sort of little eras and segmented sort of places in his career where his music is about different things and has different signifiers and stylistic sort of variances that make him very easy to be like, oh, this is when this was happening, or this was a big focal point here, yada, yada, yada. But I will say that even this early on, it's easy to see why Odd Future and them popped off, just because take a look at where hip hop was in 2009 when Bastard came out. And this is light years away, like couldn't be further away from it. And then you look at it where hip hop is, it's like in the early 2010s and like the mid 2010s, like it became like the biggest dominant commercial force in music. Hip hop became Travis Scott, it became Drake, it became trap, it became Migos, it became, everywhere. And meanwhile, though, you have Odd Future, who are embodying like they're younger, but they also embody a kind of old head hip hop feel. Again, 3 6 Mafia. So like you have like a built-in set of people who are gonna fuck with this. And then as they get more popular, as they get more resources, Tyler's influenced again by people like Pharrell. So he gets to apply a little bit more of the poppiness, as he grows up and then eventually gets to, really find his footing, as everybody eventually does. And after Bastard, that's kind of like there's the other members of Odd Future on there. So I think people were still waiting for like the proper solo debut. I feel like that maybe they got a taste of it with Bastard, but they were like, I want the next Tyler the Creator album. And that's where we go to 2011's Goblin. And this is where things are going to get very interesting because I think that Goblin is not necessarily his most divisive album because I think that honor probably goes to Cherry Bomb. But Goblin is like you can tell a lot about somebody where they rank Goblin in their thing. One piece of interesting trivia I want to throw in here is that we've kind of been building up about how they were big in the blog scene. People tend to forget this. Goblin got an 8.0 from Pitchfork when it came out. Not quite best new music, but an 8.0, a very favorable review that digests and evaluates some of its content a bit flippantly so that it can kind of ignore some parts of it and extol the virtues of others. And this was an interesting thing to revisit just because I looked back at my ratings for all of Tyler's albums before I went out to do this, and I was like, I'm really gonna go into the first half of his career with an open mind because I'm a little back and forth with some of these albums, but I also want to, truly develop a fully formed idea of what I have when it comes to my relationship with these records. And I saw that I had given Goblin a 1 star out of 5, a 2 out of 10 by my old rubric. And I first heard Goblin in maybe 2019, 2018. And I was like, okay, this seems harsh. I've often had this point where like I'll go back and revisit an album that I disliked when I was in my younger years and been like, yeah, it was a little unfair to this, or like, some parts of this have grown on me. And then I went back to Goblin and I was like, okay, open mind. I hate this. I really hate it. Like I I
Okay.
I I knew there was going to be like the one thing about Goblin that's notorious is the writing, namely specific songs and specific bars and jokes that
Yeah.
I have a lot to say about a lot of this, but here's where I need to just sort of get my overview out with Goblin is that Goblin is a 75-minute primal rage scream from a young closeted queer person who is struggling with growing up, who is struggling with the fact that there's some key context that gets lost in the discussion of Goblin, in that this is at the point where Odd Future are like they've basically splintered at this point. They didn't like break up, but this is the point where Tyler and Earl and Frank, they are all in different places. And I mean that literally, as in they're making music away from one another. They are making their own stuff. And if you read between the lines in some of the bars here, Tyler's lonely. Tyler misses his friends. Tyler misses when, they could get together and do something like the Yonkers music video. So he's afraid of being left behind. So he's lashing out for attention. He's obviously dealing with like suicidal thoughts and like all this stuff. And because he had that sort of conceptual framework, that kind of Eminem talking with his therapist thing on Bastard, we're sort of redoing that and kind of like it's basically the Slim Shady LP to the Marshall Mathers LP, where you transition tonally, but like what you're actually doing artistically is largely the same thing. You just kind of make everything sharper. And this is where I'm going to lose a lot of people because the reason I don't fuck with this album is the reason that I don't fuck with the Marshall Mathers LP, in that whatever you want to say, but like there's a lot of really great technical rhyming. There's a lot of like really interesting lyrical content. All of that can be said. There's a lot, again, a lot of technicalities that are admirable here. And the subject matter is so repetitive that I just can't. For 75 minutes, it's every single song is the exact same thing. Every song is an agonizing amount of like time. Like these songs are like 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 5 minutes, 4.5, 5 minutes, and they feel like they last a lifetime. And the thing is that that's, you don't have to pace an album super duper well for it to be great. But one thing is that it really feels like Tyler's focus this time is the writing. Because I'm willing to forgive a lot on a hip hop album if the beats knock. And Tyler's a great producer. But ladies and gentlemen, the beats on this album are ass. Like, with very, very few exceptions, the beats on here are skeletal. They take a backseat to Tyler as a performer, and they embody all of his tendencies that feel kind of cheap and tacky sounding. It's like it has aged so poorly that the Marshall Mathers LP and the Slim Shady LP come up looking like they are 20 years ahead of this, honestly. Like I genuinely, the title track on Goblin, the first song on here, this is my least favorite song Tyler has ever made because it is just it refuses to end. It's almost seven. God
It's
minutes. And
7 minutes long.
it's let me just say this much is that we're gonna say a lot of things about Goblin, but one thing that I feel like you can't put against us is the fact that we're two queer folk. We have some authority to speak with on the matter of the usage of a specific slur that Tyler likes to use on here. And let me just tell you all this. If Tyler deleted every slur, both homophobic, misogynistic, and elsewise from this album, that does not change my thoughts, not even a little bit. Like I simply would not think this album any differently. I don't love it, but obviously, as somebody who can evaluate in retrospect and see that Tyler was struggling with some things, in fact, there are a few key lines on here. It's just like it's not just somebody taking an excuse to say the F slur. There are points where you're like, hmm, what did he mean by that? And then you just kind of got to wait until the next bar comes along that grabs your attention. But the problem is that a lot of the bars on here, they fade into the background very quickly. Jen, I would like to turn over to you. What exactly was your experience with this controversial record?
Here's my okay. Here's my softball defense because I mean I agree with a lot of what you're saying here. But I do have a soft spot for certain things that are happening on this album.
Hmm.
If anything, just because they give me a nostalgia to certain kinds of music that we really don't get anymore.
Yes.
Uh, for one, we've got Yonkers, which is the obvious one of the obvious highlights of the album.
Best song here.
Um,
Best song here.
and it reminds me a lot of this period where all the up and coming rappers had to have like the barn burner early on in their
Hmm.
career. Like, this is the one that when I play it at the concert, it's gonna raise the roof. You got this, you've got Bonfire by Childish Gambino, you've got
Yep.
like 151 Rum by Jid if you want to go a little bit
Great.
further down the
Hmm.
lineage, right? This is a type of song if you study
Hmm.
artists like this in this era of hip hop. And Yonkers is a pretty good example. I'll say that it's not as
Hmm.
like it's not even as sonically vibrant as some of the other barn burners that I'm talking about, which kind of puts it toward the bottom of the ladder. It's a very your descriptor there, skeletal, is a very good one because I mean the joke is that he made the beat in 10 minutes. Uh,
Hmm.
and whether it's true or not, it feels true.
It feels true, and it's almost like that does actually feel like it adds something to it. It's like they've got a DIY punk, you can't fucking tell us what to do sort of attitude, and that's what Yonkers is basically about. It's like it's a hard ass soundtrack to Tyler eating a cockroach in that music video. It's like it was perfectly engineered to go viral in a way that felt really artful in that one respect. It's I'll say that that and the other like genuine bright spot on the album for me is soonly followed after by Nightmare, which is not an amazing song, but it is like all of the parts about Goblin that could work do work on this song. And the
Yes.
problem is that on every other song, it really, really doesn't. Like Tyler's appeal as somebody is again that he's kind of a polymath. He can kind of do whatever the hell he wants, and he's really good at being transformative. That Pharrell influence gets really, really strong with every single album. And honestly, on here, this is like Tyler appealing to that more sort of old hip hop head kind of thing. It's like this is about, the beats and the rhymes and very little else. And he's got the concept thing, and it's like this is his attempt to pull the Eminem, pull the MF Doom, kind of make a persona out of it. It's just that he, as a storyteller, is like bad at it. Like anytime there is an attempt to sort of like, oh, here's a storytelling song, there'll be like, I bet there's going to be a beat switch halfway through where he's just gonna decide to like kill all his friends despite what happened in the first half of that song. And that's more or less every song on here. Like there are parts of it where it just sort of it will have a segment of a song that is just its goal is to just be as offensive as possible to your ears, to your brain, to your heart, to like Fish is a great example of what I'm talking about here, where it's just like everything about this track is like aesthetically, spiritually ugly. Everything about this is terrible, but like it's supposed to be. It's you get the feeling that everyone is intentionally being provocative. And that's nifty, but beneath that provocation is I don't want to say nothing, but it's nothing substantive. Musically speaking, there is just not a lot to latch onto on here. And Tyler Tyler is a versatile performer, and he gets better as a performer as he's able to use production to accentuate that. But on here, it's like the flows are the same. Some of the rhyme schemes are just inescapably kind of lazy. And any features on here really just end up fading into the background, save for Frank Ocean on She, which honestly, like Frank Ocean's hook on this song. It's really the only thing this song's got going for it because everything else is just like,
I Here's the thing. Here's my thing about She. Okay. I'm gonna
hey, get
this is
up on
my
your
last
pedestal.
mild defense that I have of this album, but She also feels like the only time this concept genuinely gets a reaction out of me, and that's because it's so underhanded, right? It's
Hmm.
it's the it's the pumped up kicks to the rest of this album's like visions of bodies being burned, where just like
Yeah.
by underselling it, by being more realistic in its perversion, even in its
Hmm.
more dramatic moments, like on the Frank hook, it genuinely sells me on this goblin character as a danger because it makes it
Hmm.
more believable when he's just talking about like, yeah, I'm gonna stalk you. I'm not gonna listen to what you say to me because I'm just trying to fuck. And like
Hmm.
that is a mentality that, if you've been around a man ever in your life,
Unfortunately, haven't
you're
we
gonna
all?
run into eventually. Like, and so the way he expresses that, saying it out loud, really sells the idea of this goblin persona of the voice of the id, you know?
Hmm.
And so I have a soft spot for it. And it's the one track I'll legitimately go to bat for. I like the idea of radicals. I like the sonic notions behind radicals. It's too long. and the lyrics can't sell the
It's
length.
I was about to say it's too long and it is written in a like for every way in which I found the title track on Bastard kind of charming in its I'm not like other girlsness. This is just like, oh my God, give it a fucking rest, you reprobates. Like you're just like you feel 90 listening to this song where it's just like, oh, get it, we're radical because we're edgy. And it's just like, oh God, fucking are we gonna turn on rocket power after this? What are we fucking doing, guys? Like it's a bit like that those moments where it's like really self-consciously like, oh, we're different, where it's like with Bastard it works because they do it less and it's because it feels more like everybody's in the room for that one. Whereas this it's just like it's just continued insistence that you are a radical presence and doing the most rote shit imaginable. It's like you prove that you are a radical by indulging in behavior that is such and not insist like my biggest problem with this album is that it does in fact insist upon itself very consistently throughout its entire runtime and just does not let go. Like the funny thing is the last time that this album really gets a pulse out of me is in fact Tron Cat, just because it has the lyrics that everybody knows about that are on Tron Cat. And it's like, oh wow, that's gross. And then after that, this thing is a wasteland. Like
It
fucking
flatlines
like
completely, man.
her sandwiches, fish, bitch suck dick, which is just again it would be funny if it was like a minute and 30 seconds long and it just keeps going and then there's a
Right.
beat
Like
switch and then
imagine
it
if
keeps going.
you know the chicken dinner song on Paul's Boutique that's like a minute long.
Yeah. Hmm.
Imagine if that was 5 minutes.
But it was like
That's
Tyler
every
making
other
fun
song
of
on this
club
album.
bangers. It's
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
and and he also throws in a random instrumental into it with AU-79 for no because the album's not long enough already, so we gotta throw this fucking thing in here. And I'm like, man, like, come on. We don't need to be doing this shit. It's a project that exists so it can be described in broad strokes because whenever you interrogate anything beyond what it serves as like contextually for Tyler the Creator and Odd Future, anything underneath that, it just doesn't have legs to stand on. It's just edgy, provocateur nonsense. It's just that one after the other. And like, I see people like try to tie themselves in knots to sort of defend all of it. And it's just like, in a vacuum, I can kind of understand, but like sitting and listening this to this as an album, I do not know how you can walk away with it without thinking that it's excruciating. Like whether or not the slurs bother you, whether or not like again, he has that thing at the beginning where he's like, "Don't do any of the shit that I'm about to do," which like dude, you're covering your ass. Like I know that like I don't care about all of this stuff, but at the same time, don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining, Tyler. Like I'm not an idiot. This is just your excuse to be able to say faggot a lot. Like we don't I don't care. But like again, I've listened to old Nas albums and I simply don't care about this. But at the same time, there's usually like even with the Marshall Mathers LP, there is still an attempt to sort of put a bow around everything and tie it all together. And like, this for as much as I don't like songs like Kim, they are revealing and they are vulnerable in a way that Tyler really tries to be on here. He tries to accentuate his vulnerability and showcase himself as this like living contradiction. And he can never quite nail a character portrait of himself. He's too obsessed with trying to be his own therapist and trying to be himself and trying to be the darker version of himself and the normal version of himself. And it all gets lost. It's like I need a movie for this to be able to translate, but instead you're giving me 75 minutes of the same shit over and over again. And again, if the beats knocked, I would be so much more forgiving. This is the worst assembly of beats in Tyler's entire career, and it's not close. There's just nothing on here where I'm like, yeah, I would listen to this as an instrument. No, absolutely not. Not a one. Nope, not
Many
one.
bad ideas sound wise happening here. But also, and I want to make a larger point about horrorcore and about Tyler as a creative
Which he
presence.
says that this isn't, and it's like, sure, man, whatever.
I'd go, well, it's an attempt.
It is certainly an attempt, even though he says it's not. But like, part of me is almost like, in theory, see the appeal of something like this because again, the appeal of Tyler is that he was so different from what the current landscape looked like, and then Goblin just sort of made him stand out all the more because it was like all of those things that made him unique before are here and are more extreme. It's just that they're also not effective, like artistically. It's just that like he's viewing himself in a vacuum, and it's like it's clearly coming from a dark place and a place where he, maybe didn't have his head on straight about everything. But like I respect a lot of the intentionality, a lot of the broad concepts here. It's just that he bit off way more than he can chew in doing all of it.
Yeah, even alone the idea that Dr. TC, the twist that Dr. TC is actually the dark voice inside of his head. It
Mm-hmm.
works really well as a concept, but then he doesn't really do anything with it afterwards. And I
Mm-mm.
mean, Dr. TC shows up on the next album as a camp counselor, and so it's very clearly like not all that well thought out. And I want to connect this, as I mean, I've already made this comparison, so fuck it, I'll go there. To clipping their
Mm-hmm.
two horrorcore albums. There existed an Addiction to Blood and Visions of Bodies Being Burned. All of those songs give Daveed Diggs as an MC a chance to be a voice to concepts, whereas Tyler here is trying to embody a single
He
concept
is the concept. He's
that
trying to
that
be.
it doesn't last. It doesn't leave a lasting impact. It can't sustain a whole album without a
Mhm.
lot more imagination.
Yeah, and like I feel like this and maybe, well, really it's more the next album we'll talk about, but it's like there was a sort of burgeoning kind of alternative hip hop movement that was at the time that was sort of geared more towards Tyler's sensibilities, but was like also wrapped up, and again, like you mentioned, Childish Gambino, like because the internet comes onto the scene, and you have other rappers who are from kind of like 2000s outfits but are kind of breaking through in their own. I'm thinking of like Aesop Rock is kind of like finally after Labor Days is sort of at the peak of his powers. Open Mike Eagle starts to, do his solo work and starts getting attention from a lot of indie blogs that are writing about Tyler and stuff. So like it feels like hip hop is being ushered into these two lanes right now. One of them being the dominantly commercial and the like dominantly underground. And Tyler is kind of flirting with both, even though he's definitely favoring one more than the other. But it's like after Goblin, he kind of becomes a little bit more savvy and attempts to kind of straddle the line between the two.
And I don't want to elaborate on that too much because I want to talk about
Mhm.
Tyler's relationships with his concepts more when we get to the.
So now we're going to move on to a bit more of a fan favorite record. That being the next up in our list here, we're going to be talking about Wolf. And this is interesting just because I feel like everybody was once again just sort of waiting to see what Tyler and the crew were going to do next. It had been 2 years since Goblin, but Tyler at this point, everybody's star had risen a little bit more. The rollouts for albums were now becoming a little bit more like relevant and talked about. And I feel like people who were there, ground zero, still have a really strong affinity for an album like Wolf that admittedly I can't quite understand because it was a little bit before I got into him. But this is, I think, commonly accepted to be Tyler's first like truly agreed upon standout work. And I have my criticisms of Wolf, a litany of them, in fact, but this is kind of where the best parts of his earlier music all coalesce into something that feels more or less like it's got a very good head on its shoulders. It's sort of bastard, but more robust. It has more personality, more to chew on. He's playing with a lot more concepts like he did on Goblin, but executing them with a bit more verve or a little bit more gravitas. Just like the whole kind of thing. Like, there's not a lot on here that I just think is straight up, like the previous two records where I think, a handful of songs or an entire half of an album is more or less like you can just sort of write off. Whereas here, this is the first album that feels like an album. It feels like it's a little bit more cohesive. It feels like it's going for something. And I still don't feel like the narrative arc is there yet. There's all this talk about the first three Tyler albums about how they're kind of a thematic trilogy, which I do see in broad strokes, but a lot of how people kind of connect things together, it's a little tenuous on how much validity or stock you put in opinions like that. But I do think that Wolf is the culmination of the first sort of phase of his career into an album that, more or less this is if we're going off of his sort of comparison to other artists, Eminem, for example, this is his The Eminem Show, where it's probably the most accessible thing that he's made so far, but also debatably the sharpest, the most smartly written as well. It's got some moments on here that I think a lot of people will say are some of their favorite Tyler songs. Like we mentioned that Tyler's been talking about his relationship with his father, or really lack thereof, and how it's informed a lot of what he's done, said, and felt. That's epitomized on a track here, Answer, probably the best song on the album, and I think a true, like, one of the first contenders for like an actual, like, this is one of his tippy top best songs, where he's able to interrogate and dissect himself in a way that feels like more than just lip service like it did before. Like, this is actual vulnerability that feels like, quasi almost kind of uncomfortable to listen to. And that's more than just that as well, because I feel like Answer is sort of pointed to as the standout moment on this track. But there's also stuff on here like IFHY, which not only is it just kind of a fucking banging ass song, you get a production credit from one Mr. Pharrell Williams. This is where we see that Tyler, as with each album coming out, he's really starting to, he's good at networking, he's good at, making friends with people in the industry who bring out the best in him and that he can bring the best out of. We'll start to get to more consistent guest stars on the Tyler the Creator show as we go along, but he ends up being somebody who's, again, a little bit closer to Kanye in how he's sort of a good performer in his own right, but he's also just kind of a puppeteer of sorts, where he can get all of this talent together and get it to work with a kind of alchemy. And comparisons to like his older stuff are still going to show up on here. Like Colossus is a song that's frequently cited as being his version of Stan, where he writes about a fan and his relationship with fandom and sort of the idea of people intruding on him, which is interesting as a seed that will be planted and grown throughout the rest of his discography after this. But it is sort of the raison d'etre of early Tyler the Creator. It is kind of messy, it's kind of all over the place, and because of that, it is the most honest portrayal of him as a character and of him as an artistic voice thus far. It's maybe a little bit too long, in my opinion, but if you cut this down to its most essential tracks, I would almost be willing to say that this is a great album.
Yeah, it's definitely the first sign that we get of Tyler being able to ride that line between himself as a concept that he likes to flaunt and create, and a performer that uses space on his albums to reckon with genuinely uncomfortable feelings that he's dealing with in ways that are honestly still to this day really messy to listen to, even as we see things on this album that would be expanded on later, or even in some cases retconned out of existence practically. But yeah, you said Colossus, Pigs as well. Honestly, feels
Yes.
like a great proof of concept for everything that he was trying to do before,
Hmm.
where you're making something provocative that has something to really say about like violence and youth culture that doesn't feel so it doesn't feel so provocative that it gets away from being scared of itself.
Yeah, like before it was him saying it because he knew he'd get a reaction out of you, whereas this feels like it's an actual opinion that someone holds and they're trying to express that opinion. In that respect, I think Pigs is his white America.
Yeah. And then you've also got you've got the best version of the like messy posse cut that Odd Future have been playing around with later on in the album with Trash Wang, which is
Oh
like
boy.
5 minutes of the most indulgent shit that you've ever heard, but because they only do it once, they
It kind of
really get away
works.
with it.
Yeah, it's kind of a like walking disaster of a song, but it's a walking disaster that I really respect and admire.
Right, and because there's so many different collaborators, lesser known people from the Odd Future roster
Mhm.
contributing to this, it's made it age even better in a way where just like, oh, this is a mess, but it's a
Hmm.
mess. It's like the car crash you can't look away from in a way.
And this whole thing is sort of draped in this kind of pseudo concept about him, kind of like going to camp and, just like that's sort of the drapery, the set dressing for what's going on here. I wouldn't say it's a concept that's explored particularly thoroughly, but it's also the first time where I feel like a concept doesn't like actively hinder whatever he's doing or just again feel like the frame on a photograph, sort of like it did with Bastard. It's like here he's actually using it to navigate something. I'm not quite as decisively, but still in a way that feels like it gives the album like the flow of it actually makes a little bit of sense. Actually, the one sort of run of songs I think that is particularly great is, you start with Answer and then you have Slater afterwards, which, Frank Ocean feature. This is going to be a highlight of the album, of course. 48, a song that's not talked about a lot. And then right after you have Colossus, and then you have the track 10 sort of three-parter and Party is Over, or Party Isn't Over, Campfire and Blimmer. And these moments here really epitomize that Tyler feels like he is, you know, more of a curator, I guess, that he's like really designing this experience to be a little bit more than just like he has more aspirations than just being a good rapper. He wants to be everything. He wants to be a star, he wants to be a producer, he wants to be a performer. And this is the first album that feels like it's fully reflective of the many talents that he actually has.
Wolf really sets its aesthetic, say that 5 times fast. It really sets itself firm as being an aesthetic exercise, even if it's like storytelling concept of the summer camp angle isn't fully fleshed out. You feel a consistency with what Tyler's doing with the way that he's writing these songs and putting them together, the way that he's stringing together features, the way that he's using interludes to kind of build the attitude of the different tracks as you move from one to the other. But I will say, just to completely out myself for a second, the first car I
Go
ever
for
had
it.
was a 2011 Beamer, and those sound
Uh-huh.
effects scared the shit out of me
Oh my
because I
God.
was like, oh my God, I had a car that sounded like this. It completely threw me. I
You just
freaked the
listening to
fuck
this and
out
the
the first
Smash
time I
Brothers exclamation point pops over your head and you're like,
I really had like a Metal Gear moment where I was like, "What? I didn't
hold
know you
on
were allowed to
now.
do that." Like this, it's legit the sound library that they had in those BMWs at the time. And
Oh
so,
my God.
but we should also get to the big two-parter for me that closes out the
Right.
album, which is a contrast to end all contrasts of Tyler's talents, which is Tree
Oh
Home
yeah.
95 and Tamale.
Featuring Erica Badu, which I did
Erica
not know until
Badu,
I
man.
revisited this, which that inclusion alone tells you so much about where Tyler's headed and what his influences are, and that he's always been, for every much of a hip hop head as he's also been super into R&B and soul. Like D'Angelo, Erica Badu, like all of that scene,
Charlie
fucking
Wilson.
Sade, like Charlie Wilson, fucking like Funkadelic, like all of those influences, like they've kind of been like maybe a little bit here and there, but like not really. Wolf does kind of feel like the true debut of the Tyler the Creator that we know now.
Yeah, yeah. And so safely, Wolf first Tyler album, I would say, is good.
Yeah,
Is
it's
good in that I've
really
been coming
strong.
back to frequently. And spoilers, I'm gonna say that about everything from here on out. I love Tyler. That's the reason that we're doing this. And this Wolf is where everything that I love about him starts to really come into form and really take shape. And so it's exciting to go back and listen to Wolf. And even though it's not always as rewarding as some of the later albums, there's some stuff on here that you just can't get anywhere else, especially for the time that it was coming out and for the environment that it was in.
And I feel like that's why this remains such a fan favorite and why like longtime Tyler fans might have this a little bit like higher ranked than most people is that it's sort of the culmination of Odd Future as they were and as they were kind of dissipating because like once we had Wolf, that's when, Frank's gonna go on to make Blonde. That's when fucking Earl's going on to make I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside. That's when like everybody's like really finding their critical and artistic foothold, which is interesting because right around the time where everyone starts finding their foothold is where I think you could argue that the first time that Tyler ends up slipping just a little bit. And I don't say that because it's a reflection of a quality or something. It's just that Tyler was on an upward trajectory with each release, like coming onto the scene with Odd Future. He made a name for himself. Bastard just kind of exemplified his hype. Goblin was like weird. It created discussion and controversy around him. Like he was banned in Australia, for example, which I still actually think he might still be to this day. Whack shit. He was scaring your parents. He was doing all that shit. And then, by the time, Wolf rolls around, like this is at the point where, Tyler's like, setting up like festivals and like performances and stuff. Like he's becoming a fully blown like musical force within the industry. And that's no better reflected on the fact that on 2015's Cherry Bomb, he has the highest set of like there's so many collaborators on this. And not only are they notable collaborators, the ones who you don't immediately recognize as huge big names are people who after this would become exponentially bigger. I mean, you look back at the feature list on Cherry Bomb and it's like you've got Schoolboy Q, you've got Kali Uchis, you've got like again names that are going to become more relevant after this album rather than before it with names like Kanye. So it's interesting because again, Wolf sort of like again, you're sort of building, maximizing, going forward with your level of hype. And Cherry Bomb is really more of a lateral move when it comes to criticism because this is the first one that was of his albums that was reviewed. I don't even think poorly. I think it was just a lot of mixed reception that had to do with this album's production style, which is overridingly the big thing everyone talks about with it. And I'm just going to set the record straight with this. This album is mixed and mastered terribly. Like, if you are looking for for an album to sound in the way, like a traditionally good album sounds, you're not going to find it here. This is distorted, blown out, compressed to the point where it feels like it's inhabiting an entirely new aesthetic. It is draping itself in a kind of lo-fi neo soul that feels completely different from anything he's ever made. It's like the core of Tyler is in this. It's just smothered in this new sound that he really, really wants to sort of set everything within. And on evaluating it from the outside, it does sound kind of terrible. I also don't really care all that much. I have problems with this. I am very mixed on Cherry Bomb as a whole, but I am kind of able to just sort of mentally check out of the fact that this album does sound a bit like Booty because it clearly lays the foundation for his sound in the future, particularly one project that we all know is coming. And yes, it is not a skillful execution of that, but like the excessive slur usage on Goblin, it's just kind of something that bounces off me after a little while, and I'm able to sort of take this more at face value in that Cherry Bomb has a lot of things going against it. However, it also does feel like he didn't lose any of his Tylerness. There's nothing about this album that isn't bold in the same way that Wolf is, still bold and colorful and interesting and unique and makes several of its own advancements in his sound so that I feel like you can come down on this in one of two ways. You can view the sound of Cherry Bomb as a half measure that fails out of the gate because it doesn't accomplish what it sets out to. Or you could view it as a series of half measures that ultimately end up complementing a mixed bag. I tend to favor the latter reading, but I was surprised returning to this with how much I wasn't distracted by the sound and was at least able to enjoy several of the individual tracks on here a whole lot.
This is something that I've been thinking about as well, but to once again use the X locked so Y could run. You don't get Brockhampton without Odd Future, and you also don't get Scaring the Hose without Death Camp.
God,
That is
yeah,
the
this
first thing
beat,
I thought of when I put this album on, was I was like,
dude,
oh, this is what would later be refined
the
into stuff
sound
like what JPEG
quality,
Mafia is doing.
the sound quality is ass, and also Death Camp is so hard. It's so hard.
Like, what's
The
the difference?
drums
What's
on
the
this
difference
are
really?
deafeningly loud.
What's the difference really
Deafening.
between this and the post chorus, the instrumental break on like Garbage Pail Kids? Let's be real.
Mm-mm. There isn't
It's
one. Like
it's
there's
there. That
it's
interplay between, and there's other interplays going on here too. The one that Tyler didn't really hold on to after this was the interplay of rock and
yeah.
his rapping, which you especially see on Death Camp. You're not going to see Tyler really do that kind of thing on any future records, but you're going to see him do a lot of songs that sound like what he ends up doing on Flower Boy and on
Hmm.
Igor. But he's also working with lyrics and working with instrumental styles that still make Cherry Bomb a really singular and a really unique project that's interesting to go back to. Like, I hate
Hmm.
to keep bearing on it, but like Death Camp makes such a great first impression for me. Honestly, if
Hmm.
the whole album sounded like this, I might like it a lot more if it was even more abrasive, you know?
If it was literally just like a fucking noise rock album, I mean, like basically it would be like imagine like it would be paired beautifully with The Powers That Be Part One
Yeah,
for
yeah,
Death
you
Grips.
you get Jenny Death.
Loud, distorted guitars, murky fucking drums, and like just using these like this is what when Tyler just fully delves into his producer mode. And yes, there's a lot that I feel like you could argue he does wrong, but he makes his sound a purely textural thing. And I really respond to when an artist does that because they tend to hone in on the things that make their aesthetic the most extreme. And it ends up being something that complements songs like Death Camp and my favorite song on here, which is a song that nobody really fucking talks about, which is Two Seater. And Two Seater is like beautiful. Two Seater
It's
is like a
great.
perfect dry run for Igor. Like there's a beautiful amount of soul. I love the song vocals on this. Like everything about it, just like it is all of this album's most effective things crystallized in one moment. And even my least favorite moments on this album, like the title track, for instance, is still a song where I'm like, man, I really respect what you're going for here. It's just that it is so fucking unlistenable that you can't draw anything tangible out of it at all. But like there is something there that again it's like listening to On GP where it's got this fucking like caveman brain unga bunga like yeah sort of thing to it. It's like again, it's really fun. It's really propulsive. It makes listening to Cherry Bomb, which again is kind of 55 minutes. It's not one of his longer albums in this phase of his career, but it's still something that feels like it does have a relatively solid pace to it. Like again, you've got Pharrell Williams, which is on here on the penultimate track. Again, Schoolboy Q's on here. Fucking like
Twice.
yes, this is twice, no less. And like Sid Bennett is on here a bunch of times, who most people might know is like Sid from the internet. And then there's also songs on here that are just like, I don't even know what to make of them, but I think I enjoy them. Like The Brown Stains of Darkis Latifah Part 6 through 12
That
remix,
one's a
which
highlight for me.
I I don't know what the fuck this song is, but while it's on, I'm like, I'm kind of like Jay-Z when he's in like, that little gif where he's like, that's me listening to all of Cherry Bomber. I'm just like, I think it goes. And you've got songs like Smuckers, which is really beloved, which if I'm gonna throw out my one hot take, I think that Smuckers is a good song, but it's not like my favorite thing on here or anything. I just kind of think that people see the featured artists and go like, "Hey, I know who they are," and like they're good, but like
They
it's
deliver. They both
yeah, it's
deliver.
It's fine. Then there are moments on here like Blow My Load, which are all of the album's most unflattering qualities kind of blended into one thing. But even then, it's like a drive-by. It's like it happens and it's kind of but like it's over pretty quickly and then it moves on to its next idea. This is very much Tyler, the Creators, if we can go back to because like Tyler is basically Kanye for our generation. If you really think about all of the his merits and the way that he changes the landscape of music and the way that he works as an artist, this is his Yeezus. This is him being like, here's the contradictory of who nature of who I am manifested via sound, and the songwriting is what I've been doing, but it's also like it's primal, it's very, again, kind of unga bunga caveman, but there are attempts to sort of layer in some emotionality through it with another discourse stirring song, the track 10 on here, the split song Fucking Young and Perfect, which is another example of like, do I love that this song is about Tyler being like, oh, why can't I have my age gap relationship? Meh. It's just like fucking I don't like that, but also like the song itself is pretty good. And I like how Tyler, it's still a song written with a perspective that it's just like it's all, it's self-examining. It's him being like, I feel this way because I'm not mature enough for my age. Like but it still gets kind of weird there at the beginning with the way that he's like setting out the appeal of this person. Again, it's something that he will do so much better on every album he makes from here on out. And right there, it's just like it feels like he's trying to make an interesting point with this song and like trying to mine something, and he just never comes to a conclusion beyond, oh well. And it's like it just like one more rewrite, dude. Like one rewrite, and I really feel like you'd have something with this song.
Yeah, it's the first what I'll call a Tyler the Creator confessional, which,
Hmm.
we have a few of those in his discography. It's also the track 10 that feels the most cohesive in its two parts. I mean, even the titles
Hmm.
alone kind of play off of each other in interesting ways between the first and second
Hmm.
venues there. But no, I mean, I think this and Find Your Wings have something in common, which is that like they're missing one great move from having the classic Tyler the Creator song level to them, both of which we'll see kind of be surpassed by similar attempts later on
Hmm.
in his discography. But songs that still exist in interesting places in his career that are interesting to talk about for that specific reason.
Yeah, it's an ugly album that you have to really give yourself over to, but it's more the reason I like I'm willing to go with it is just because it is a better designed album than something like Goblin, but it is also just inherently a more interesting exercise. In fact, it's sort of like those are the two polarities of like his styles, because like Goblin is relatively kind of minimal when you sort of like pare everything back, and then this is just it's maximal. It's like if you jam the two of these albums together, you can probably pull out Wolf from the two of them, and that's why it's sort of like Cherry Bomb, I feel like, has been retroactively sort of like some people are kind of like really in this album's bag, and like I see the vision with it. I do see it. It does have like enough duds on here for me to still say it's not really an album that I super enjoy, but it is still a record that I like a hell of a lot more than I don't. I can't say that I'll be returning to much of it beyond like the songs that bang, just because it's very suited to have songs that bang with this very percussive and rhythmic sort of style, but also just because everything that he attempts to do on here is more or less the rest of his career, but like perfectly embodied.
Which is where we get to the start of really the start of the Tyler the Creator that everybody knows and loves today, which is Flower Boy,
Hmm.
which is such a bizarre move. Like the sonic difference in this and Cherry Bomb is astounding. Not only because it's going for, a more consistent, more conventional approach to fidelity and what we might consider good production in the grand scheme of things, but also it's going in a lot. most of the time. It's going in a lot softer places. It's going in a lot more melancholy isn't the right word, but it's going in a lot more vibrant places, a lot more colorful places, a lot of places that flirt with the idea of getting away from hip hop altogether in certain
Hmm.
respects. But it never feels like we're getting away from what Tyler wants to be doing. We've really seen a sea change between Cherry Bomb and Flower Boy in his aesthetic interests without losing any of what makes him special as a songwriter, as a performer, as a thinker. And that's what makes this whole discography so interesting is that even in its largest differences in sonic approaches, Tyler is still Tyler, and so there's always going to be some qualities that you can expect that are going to be consistently getting better as we go through. And this is where we really start to see Tyler, the creator, the artist, the persona, be solidified in a way that feels like it's been able to last in the culture, right? Like Flower Boy
Hmm.
came out right when I was about to go off to college, and that feels really important. And this feels like a big college album for the folks of our generation, I'm sure. And what makes it so special is just how well Tyler is able to balance like the hard stomping appeal of some of this with the genuinely bold, considering his previous oeuvre, willingness to sit back and be a little bit softer and express different feelings in his songs, but only in the way that he can. I mean, we can start with an early highlight in the track list, like See You Again is such a perfect
Is
song,
is
dude.
See You Again his most popular song at this point?
I think so. When I was on the Spotify page earlier today, I think it's still at the top, even with Chromacopia still very recent and climbing that
And
chart.
And honestly, I really wouldn't have it any other way because I See You Again is maybe one of the most quintessentially perfect 2010s hip hop songs. It is like the pitched up vocal refrains on here, the chord choices, it's just everything about Flower Boy that is fantastic is embodied here perfectly. And it's also like, Tyler, once he does slide into this song and starts rapping, and I mean, his flow is fantastic. Like the way that he's talking, the cadence of his voice is more relaxed than it ever has been. And that's actually kind of the key to so much of this record is that there is like when it comes to performance, there's actually a lot less immediacy than the last couple of albums that he's had. He's kind of just been on that like husky delivery, but it's like here he's really choosing when to, apply his voice in certain ways, to use sung vocals, the chipmunked vocals in certain ways. And it's just like all of these elements of his sound, and he just manages to balance all of it in an album experience that finally feels as close to perfect as he's able to get. Like I'm just kind of continually in awe of an album like this because when it first came out, 2017 was that first year I got really into music, and I was set up flawlessly by getting into Brockhampton and then immediately going into Flower Boy because it's like, oh, these albums are sisters basically, like, or I mean, technically speaking, I guess it would be more of a an aunt and uncle kind of thing with Tyler, just because it's like he inspired Brockhampton, and now Brockhampton are the biggest thing in alternative hip hop, and they're making albums that sound exactly like the albums Tyler are making, the bright saturated synths, the beautiful strings, and again, the thing that Tyler is, I feel like, the most at least known for when it comes to like his musical skills is his affinity for chords. Like when he talked like in an interview about this album, he was just like obsessed with the idea of chords as a producer, as a musician that came from that sort of Pharrell influence. And that's why so much of his catalog now is full of these songs that have these incredibly ambitious musical stylings to them that all begin here. And like again, I love the amount of strings that are on this album, just like from forward onward, like to where this flower blooms. Like it has this amazing cinematic feel to it that just sets the stage so amazing for Tyler to come out and say things like the fact that he's been kissing white boys since 2004. Which is an interesting development because I remember when this came out, naturally, Tyler, he even in his like his least discourse stewing album, he still causes discourse, is that people were like, how do we reckon with Tyler the Creator's place in queerness? And everybody who wasn't an idiot's answer was, I don't know, we just fucking do. What are you like what are you gonna say? What are you gonna tell him no? You gonna
Yeah,
like
because
what are
there
you
a
gonna
line? Is
do?
there a line somewhere he has to figure out where to
Yeah,
stand in? Like,
and
no, not
and
really.
he Tyler very smartly I'll say that the fact that he just kind of flippantly admits it and does make that into the broader character portrait that he does on Flower Boy is that like when it comes to the things that he's dealing with, it's kind of all the same things he was dealing with on Goblin. It's just that the quiet part is just finally said out loud. And it really shows you how much he's matured as both a person and as an artist, like to the point where he will be retrospectively commenting on his old career. Like he'll do that more and more from here on out as being like on the next or not the next album, but the album after next, he'll allude to the fact that Cherry Bomb sounded shifty, or talk about the fact that he had to talk to Selena Gomez despite the fact that he had some lines about some people like her that were
Did that
let's
actually happen?
I'm not sure if it was, but like I'm pretty sure that they were like at the Grammys at the same time or something, and they like were seen like speaking to one another. So like
She
maybe
presented
that's a
him with an
thing.
award at some point, I'm aware,
Hmm.
but I don't know
And
what happened after
I,
that.
I
And
I
that
don't.
is, for all of Tyler's faults, yeah, you kind of can't get away from that one, buddy. Like
Yeah,
there's no
it,
excuse for
it's
that shit, dude.
it's just like on the like because this is still a thing that like happens today where it's like that whole TikTok meme of like Gen Z every month tries to cancel Eminem, and it's like it's
That's
funny
been
because
happening with the release of
that
Chromacopia, which is why it's been on
yeah,
my mind.
that doesn't happen with Eminem, but it absolutely does with Tyler. Is that like every time he'll release a new album, everybody finds out about the lyrics to Goblin, and like on the one hand, I understand that it is incredibly fucking frustrating to have an album that you have disowned, like that Tyler has said he's just like is like I don't like that's not me anymore, basically, but like and having to keep bringing that up, it probably sucks, but also like I know he'll never do this because he's him, but it's like an earnest apology would get you a long way, but we know he's not going to do that, so let's all
I don't need
just,
him to apologize to Selena Gomez to me.
yeah, like
That's not what
it's just
I'm
like
calling for.
I don't give a shit. Uh Again, that said though, this is him turning over a new leaf and that like all of the edginess of early Tyler is still very much like it's still on Wolf. It's just a little bit more measured. And it's very much on Cherry Bomb. It feels like he's trying to be kind of provocative on that album, whereas here it's like he's being provocative but in an internal way, in a way that like it's like he knew that the way to shock people this time around was by being himself, by lifting the veil, and like the best way I can stir shit is by being me. And that approach works really, really well because he's doing all of these things that, like, again, he's got the two-part track 10 on here, 911 Mr. Lonely, which is one of the songs I think he performed because it was a single on like Letterman or Kimmel or one of those late night shows. And I just remember hearing that and just being like, damn, this is like really fun and poppy and catchy. Where the fuck is this the same Tyler the Creator guy I've been hearing about? And then the album drops, and it's just like instantly a canonized classic. Just like it's like the album everybody has been waiting for from him. And again, you got those songs that are just instantly iconic, like See You Again with the Kali Uchis feature, Who That Boy, which is one of his absolute best trunk knockers. Just who that boy, who him
Who
is.
them
Fucking
is?
with ASAP Rocky, which is fantastic. And I mean, you've got Garden Shed with Estelle on there of all people.
Crazy
Um,
pull.
Super underrated track in my opinion is Boredom. I just, again, like the idea of Tyler like making a song about his main creative frustration being that he's bored out of his skull. The "my eyeballs are turned into drywall" is one of my favorite little stanzas he's got. "I ain't got time" is fun as hell. Again, 911 Mr. Lonely is fun. You got a really solid Lil Wayne feature on Dropping Seeds as he shows up. Glitter is an awesome closer moment. Like it's just that everything, every like beat you want a hip hop album to hit, this album does it, man. Like, and it's 14 songs long, 46 minutes. It really feels like there was an effort to make this his most well-groomed album. It's like it's loaded with features, but he never takes the spotlight away from himself. And it's all, again, it's very revealing, it's very confessional, but it's also very frank. He's not veiling himself through a concept or a narrative or even a device, really. It's like these songs are just him singing about how, like, about himself, about his problems. And again, he is singing more. Rapping is a little bit more of a something that he does about maybe 50-60% of the time, but the pitched up singing is a little bit more present here now. The neo soul vibe, the Pharrellness of this album cannot be understated. And it just makes for a colorful, fun, revealing experience that like Tyler's coming out is interesting just because when you look past all the bullshit of it at the time, I think the most interesting thing about it is that he ultimately, like, as he's evolved as that sort of enfant terrible persona, it's like his sexuality has become a component of him that is sort of like shit stirring that that he knows makes people uncomfortable that he puts to the forefront more, but that he's also
Yeah.
genuinely interested in talking about in the respect that he's like, this is a part of me, but like it's also like 10% of me. So like don't think about trying to look at me through any other lens other than the one that I fucking give you. It's that very outspoken, very sort of bullish attitude that he's always had that I mean genuinely kind of admire about him as an artist. That's what's attractive about artists like Tyler. But also was kind of inspiring to a young queer closeted version of myself that didn't really know how to feel about all of these confusing things I had. And to just hear Tyler come out and be like, I mean, like, is what it is, my dude. And the fact that you could just be that way, it meant something. I think that's kind of why people were so willing to shove Goblin under the rug a little bit, is because people are like, this feels really earnest. And also just, I mean, I feel like that's the way a lot of queer people treat their identities now, and it not necessarily was the case beforehand.
However, interesting twist in your conclusion there about Tyler's sexuality, which is that our next album, it becomes
Oh boy.
the thematic center in a way that makes for his most interesting story yet. We have 2019's Igor, and this is where I popped the fuck off because I have
Hmm.
loved this album ever since it came out. It's been my favorite album of his. It's such a great concept album, which is something I'm so glad I can finally say about a Tyler
Ah.
the Creator album, which is that the concept at its center is rich. It's
Hmm.
inexorable from any of the songs that appear on it. And it's so unapologetically him, but it never loses that fun that he is because I mean at this point Tyler's one of the biggest artists in the world.
Hmm.
Igor is the thing that pushes him over the edge for that even, which is so interesting. Like you would think that Flower Boy would be the breakout success. No, it's Igor.
Hmm.
Igor cemented him as one of the people to watch for the rest of his career. It performed better. It got to the number one spot immediately. It was his sign that he was not just like a popular artist, but he was a legitimate cultural force. And he did all that on a concept album about a love triangle with him and another guy. Like, and it's so great. The first single, Earthquake, it's track two on the final album.
Oh,
Earthquake is such a great adaptation of the aesthetic sensibilities of Flower Boy, but it goes even further in Flower Boy's kind of departure from his original style because you hear him and he's singing the
Hmm.
whole time. Somebody
Pitched up.
else shows up to rap. Like
Hmm.
he is fully embracing his love of R&B, his love of neo soul. He's letting his singing voice come out, and it's such an interesting way to start this album cycle, which is the low point, the emotional low point, the earthquake is so interesting to reckon with because I mean the whole album is about a breakup and the cycle, the emotional cycle that you go through when that happens of I don't want to call it five stages of grief, but it mirrors it to an
It's
extent
close.
where it's like you have the anger, you have the begging, you have the threats, you have the saying shit that you probably shouldn't say. And then at the very end you have the begging in a different way where, are we still friends? But to go back to the beginning, what I love about Igor is that it's such a nice adaptation of the sonic sensibilities of Cherry Bomb in a way that's a lot more palatable to an
Hmm.
R&B album, where you have that like heavy it sounds like a John Carpenter synth. Like it starts like
Hmm.
you're starting a John Carpenter movie, but then those drums kick in and it just absolutely pops off. It's
Oh,
such a great.
every drum fill on this album is just it's compressed to all fuck. And I love them. They are crunchy. A lot of them are hand drums too. Like there is so much richness to just this album's percussion, which is crazy when you consider that again, it is his most overridingly neo-soulish album, which is, he's got a little bit more interplay between rhythm and melody on here rather than focusing on just one or the other like he had before. But like just the way he's able to add definition to instrumentals by also like flattening them in a way is like again it just shows you how far he'd come as a producer in just 4 years, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that that low droning synth throughout Igor's theme is the backbone. It really gives
Hmm.
you a sense that you're doing something lo-fi, but you're doing it purposefully. Not because you can't make something that sounds a certain way, but because this is the way it's supposed to sound. It's supposed
Mm.
to sound a little bit abrasive. It's supposed to sound a little bit monochromatic in certain places, in
Hmm.
certain ways to convey the more important thing for this album, which is the lyrics and the way that Tyler conveys this character of Igor, which is really his first success at creating a character for himself that he's able to play throughout the album's kind of aesthetic cycle. Igor is a costume. There is a costume for Igor, right? It's a personality, but it gets at something real about Tyler still, which is that his feelings towards romance, his feelings towards emotional connections to other people are messy. They're unconventional. And so this leads him to a place where somebody wants to have, to put it as bluntly as I can, where somebody wants to have a binary approach to this kind of emotional bond. And this just doesn't compute in his head. And so the whole album spawns from that.
And just from listening to the way you're even talking about this, there's so much complexity, just the way that this narrative is even set up, let alone executed. So it really does feel like Tyler spent the last album getting his head on straight so he could deliver something fully formed artistically. And it was so this caught me so off guard. I didn't like Igor when I first heard it. I remember when it dropped and I listened to it like the first four or so songs and like so much of the subtleties and intricacies of this are something that you're just not looking for when you want to hear a hip hop album. So when I heard that, I was just like, why does so much of this sound like easy listening shit? And I was just like, eh. And then I put it on a couple weeks later after the entire world was screaming about how it was the best goddamn thing ever. I'm like, okay, maybe I need to sit down and actually give this thing a full dedicated listen. And I definitely gave this a lot of I think this may have been the 2019 album I listened to the most when all is said and done. Maybe not my favorite of that year, but damn fucking close. But like I'm just every moment of this album is so vital. Like there's never a moment where it like drops the ball. It's just like the momentum from Igor's theme is perfectly like segued into after Earthquake, and then you get I Think, which has the bigger kind of like wider panned drums that are awesome.
Yes.
And then Running Out of Time's the sweeter kind of more poppy moment. New Magic Wand is your banger. Boy is a Gun is again, it's like that more Pharrell sort of style. And then you have Puppet, which, has Kanye on here. And these are the most Kanye fucking bars he's ever delivered.
Kanye's doing
What's
crazy
Good?
shit on this song.
He, and he's like in the background just being like, hey, I'm over here. Like the way he's mic'd is like really
You
funny in the
taught me how
context of
to
the whole song.
be.
And it's like it's like the same way with Gone Gone Thank You is the like the featured vocalists here. Like I love the performance style. It's like to the point where like I feel like it's really capitalized up on Are We Still Friends, which is this again like spotlit end of the movie, like end of La La Land
It's a
ass fucking
dramatic
like
crescendo. This
yeah.
is a
y-
drama, dude. This is an
it's
opera.
it's so theatrical and it's so like there's just there again there's so much like this gets to the heart of what is so great about Tyler, that he's a nerd, where he's like he's drawing from these different influences, he's drawing from all these musical things, he's making this into a story. This feels like the purest distillation of who Tyler is as a pure creative force, just because it's all these things that he has dabbled in before, but he's just going overdrive with all of it. He's committing aesthetically. He's committing like it's the most extreme, but also the most just sort of like beautiful thing that he's made when you like really sort of pare it back and compare it to everything else. It kind of feels like, if anything, I would almost say that like uh Flower Boy is kind of like his 808s and Heartbreak, which I guess makes this album a little bit more of like a Life of Pablo situation, where it's about contradiction, but it's also about storytelling. It's about the journey of its main character. It's about sort of like whatever framing device you want to put it in. It's about sort of like taking your aesthetic as far as it goes, whether that be with gospel and like contemporary sort of West Coast hip hop or neo soul like it is on here. And it's tight, it's refined, it's full of momentum. It's probably the sharpest thing he's ever written, at least up until this point, IMO. But again, it's like this thing came out and it was just instantly canonized. Like even quicker than Flower Boy, I feel like, is that it was just understood to everyone to be an artistic feat worth appreciating.
I think it was the Grammy performance that solidified it in the culture.
Which just Earthquake is such a fucking banger. And then you listen to it, even though I've listened to this song literally maybe 1,000 times in my life. And I go back and listen to it and I'm like, no wonder I fucking thought this was weird on first listen. This is a weird fucking song. Like to be as successful as it is, Earthquake is an anomaly. What the fuck about this song makes it qualified to chart up there with any given pop song that came out in 2019? Nothing. I can't give you a single definitive reason as to how, other than Tyler's innate star power. And thank God for that, because I fucking love this song. I mean, it's a jam. It's fucking awesome.
An album that deserves its canon status along with Flower Boy as a part of an incredibly important period for an incredibly important cultural figure in this kind of music, in this time period. I genuinely, and we're going to get more into this with the last two albums, but I genuinely think this last few albums that we're in with Tyler the Creator is going to be seen as a very historic run for any artist of our current day.
Unquestionably. DJ drama.
This shit for the Sun
Right?
Seekers.
Next up on here, we're gonna be talking about an album that technically we have actually reviewed on the podcast back when it came out in 2021. A particularly memorable week during that summer for me was the dual release of Tyler the Creator's Call Me If You Get Lost and Lucy Dacus's Home Video, which are two albums that ruled my fucking life in 2021. Constantly listening to those two was basically my entire summer. And when we talked about it on the podcast, it was basically a perfect litmus test for how everyone felt about Tyler. And that I was the biggest fan, so naturally I liked it the most. And everybody else was like, yeah, this is good. And I don't really fault them for that evaluation because when you circle back, Call Me If You Get Lost is very much a safer album than the two albums that came before it. It's an album that doesn't exactly unearth anything new in Tyler in the way that his last couple have. But what we do get is maybe less of the forward front facing Tyler the Creator, the artist, and more Tyler the Creator, the curator that I've kind of been mentioning, where it's like it feels like a more playlist inclined mixtape direction that basically lets Tyler freewheel it over a ton of beats that knock like motherfuckers and basically, segue from moment to moment. I remember being like when the my point for comparison when we talked about it on the show initially was that like this is like Mad Villainy if the person who rapped and produced it was the same person, where it's just a pure exercise in showcasing raw skill and the production that backs up that raw skill. And ever since then I've just kind of loved Call Me If You Get Lost even more. Like with each passing year, I up until semi recently, this was my favorite Tyler album.
I remember, I think we were talking about the Denzel Curry album that had
Hmm.
come out a few months later, and I
Hmm.
referenced it and I called it the Victory Lap album. And that
Yeah.
descriptor still very much holds true. It's got this mixtape, homespun vibe to it. The use of DJ Drama as the MC behind the whole thing is so genius. Because I remember when Lumberjack dropped, everybody was so confused. They're like, what is DJ Drama? What is he doing? Because the track stops like 15 seconds in. And it literally stops. DJ Drama, hold up. And then they do this
Hold
little
up.
bit. Oh, and then Tyler has this funny little bit. It's like, oh my God. These fucking fans were being stupid. Now you ready?
Oh, it's
And we
so
go
like
right back in. And that's the first single, is this like kind of weird attempt at a banger.
and the whole album is like you take a look at the song lengths and it's like Tyler's a guy who's never been afraid of that elusive third verse. He'll make a song long if he has to, and he's always got shit to say. But you take a look at this and you see it's assembled piecemeal. And it's like this contains some of his longest songs up until this point, and also several of his shortest. And you're like, are these gonna like develop into ideas that, and the answer is yes, because it's all like, three 1 minute and 40-second long songs is less a, three songs and more a suite of ideas for Tyler to explore. And then as soon as he gets bored with one, he immediately transitioned into something else. And it gives this, again, that sort of freewheeling, very fast pace, very summery vibe. Like this is one of the best summer albums that has come out in recent years. Like again, I love, feeling that first bit of June sunshine and then throwing on Lumberjack in my car because again, it's a fucking banger. It also reuses an old 3-6 Mafia Prince, not 3-6 Mafia, Gravediggers Prince Paul beat, which is
Yeah.
fucking great. And I mean, again, this is just an excuse for him to make some of the coolest beats that he's ever made. I fucking love the beat on Manifesto. My God, this thing sounds like it's from another galaxy, dude. And the fucking you got Lil Wayne coming on here on Hot Wind Blows, who is legitimately sounds better than he sounded on any of his own albums in the past 15 years at this point.
It's
You have
so
Tizo Touchdown showing up on Run It Up. Like Young Boy Never Broke Again is on What's Your Name? And Ty
Domo
Dolla
making a
Sign?
comeback.
is like it's genuinely like you take a look at this and you're like, is Tyler just like reaching in and getting a few people because they're hot right now? And it's like, no, if Young Boy's got a better verse than he does on here, I haven't fucking heard it. And I mean, same goes for like there's some really weird features in like the back half of this. We get another one from Pharrell Williams, of course, on Juggernaut, as well as Lil Uzi Vert of all fucking people. Fucking 42 Doug on Lemonhead, which those fucking horns at the very beginning of Lemonhead are so fucking fun. Horns in general, like he uses more of as time
Yes.
goes on, and they do definitely presage like the oh, what's the song on Scare and the Hose with the big loud ESPN horns, the like bam
Perfect.
bam bam. Yeah, perfect. It's that's like every like so many of the beats to projects like that feel like they find their inception here. And it's like this whole thing is just Tyler sort of inventing. He's like exploring this sort of new character. Like before we had, Igor and, his other characters. Whereas this is the Baudelaire incarnation of Tyler, the one where he's hopping on jets constantly, indulging in decadence and all this stuff. And, it feels like at this point, Tyler's earned an album like this, where the emotional stakes are very much like taken away from. It really does kind of feel like this is a self-conscious attempt to just make a more like to just have less constraints or to have, to not be confined by your emotional state. Like Tyler was, pretty obviously feeling himself, riding on the success of his last two albums. He's the rare anomaly in this industry where as he gets more unique, he becomes more popular, which again, in the age of Drake, is all the more worthy of celebration, frankly. Like you don't have to make yourself the least interesting version of yourself in order to still be a star, which Tyler very clearly is. And again, it's not something that makes total holistic sense in the way his previous two records did, but it allows him to have this sort of raw execution, this pure technicality that just makes these so much fucking fun. And it's also not devoid of ambition too. Again, you got like the more like the sweeter, poppier moments like What's Your Name are sweeter and poppier than they have ever been before. And there's also songs like the structurally ambitious Sweet and I Thought You Wanted to Dance, which is just like, I mean, what fucking isn't in a song like this? It would be easier to count the amount of influences that Tyler doesn't directly reference on here, or the incredibly awesome freestyling of a song like Wilshire, where his storytelling is really kind of up to the stakes and sort of like weaving this narrative. It's like, wow, I can't believe this is the same guy who was like trying to spin 40 different songs out of the exact same emotion on Goblin. Whereas this is just Tyler being a little bit of a home wrecker, but I'm listening to it and it's like, he really like sits the listener down and is just like, hey, here's a story about me. And it's like it's just got this feeling where you feel like you're on vacation the whole time you're listening to this. And you're getting champagne, you're sitting by the pool and everything's, the sun's shining, your skin's clear, you're moisturized, you're unbothered. It's a lovely time with a great pace to it. It's not anything high concept or anything, but I feel like that's the secret sauce of the album, is that what it lacks in vision, it makes up for in just the amount of desire that it goes with. It loves to. It's an album that never stops moving, and I really appreciate that because a lot of tightly wound conceptual hip hop projects that are a little bit more lyric driven, they demand your attention, and I love those projects. They're amazing. We're about to talk about another one. But there is still, I'm just glad that this exists because Tyler didn't have a moment where he really just kind of let the fucking reins loose and just sort of used his talent to, he didn't really, it doesn't feel like anything's reined in, I guess. He's a little indulgent on here, but within very specific confines.
Yeah, it's working in a very, I won't say narrow, because there are some points on this album where he does take a moment to address some happenings that are important to
Hmm.
him
And
distract that distract a
there's
little bit from the vacation concept, but the way he's able to do it, it spins back around to affirming his continued successes.
well, it's just like it's showing you why he wants to get away to begin with, which is kind of again planting the seed for what might come next. But he has a line on here that I feel like truly embodies his creative spirit and how he's matured and how he would phrase something like this. It's just one bar where he says, "Tell these black babies they can do what they want." And that's what Tyler the Creator is. He is the embodiment of being able to cast aside any limitations of what you might have, like societally speaking, and just being able to artistically be yourself in the purest form. And that manifested earlier on when he was younger in the way that he was, a little shit, in the way that he was a spitfire, in the way that he couldn't be contained and couldn't be ignored. So he wanted to be the loudest voice in the room. But now, with the world like watching him, he's under all these different pressures, but he's still saying the same thing. It's just that it's dressed up in a lot more nuance and it means a little bit more now because it's like, look at how far he has come and look at what he has accomplished. It means something when you're not just saying, do whatever the fuck you want and you're just making your, vaguely horrorcore inspired debut mixtape. And then when you are making an album that is going to go 4 times platinum.
Yeah, I mean, the key for me is in that spoken word intro to Run It Up, where he's just like,
Hmm.
yeah, I've always had confidence. Nobody's ever been able to tell me no. And look how far it got me.
Hmm. You get Tyler's mom on here eventually, which like you hear one clip from this woman and you're just like, wow, I know exactly why Tyler is the way he is now because she's talking about fighting some other kid and fighting that kid's parents. It's so fucking funny. And
I
Tyler's just
beat
like,
up kids.
she sounds exactly like him, just gender swapped. There's like barely anything different about their voices. It's so
It's
funny.
so great. And the thing that made this album great as a summer album is that he carried that energy into the next summer when he dropped this album's most essential component, the
The
estate
estate
sale.
sale.
One of the most important deluxe album releases probably ever in the post iTunes era.
And it's also kind of him eschewing like that's something that a lot of people are doing to stream game these days is that they release the deluxe version of their album a week after the original album comes out. Like again, Lil Uzi Vert did this with Eternal Take One, and like somebody else did that year too. But like that's just I'm who's that fucking awful rapper that nobody likes? Nav did the same thing.
Nav, yeah,
Um,
he did that back in
but
the peak pandemic. So everybody was
and
there to roast him for it.
And thank God Tyler's approach to this was simply, okay, what if I did this, but I dropped an EP's worth of some of the most fun songs that I've ever made and staple it to my most fun album? And frankly, I can't listen to Call Me If You Get Lost without the estate stale tracks anymore. I like Vince Staples, Vince
Mm.
Staples, Vince Staples. Mic drop.
Vince Staples.
But seriously, these fucking like what is it, 5 songs?
It's I've got the track list in front of me here. It's one, two, it's seven, but that's with the 30
Okay.
second intro. So really
Yeah,
six.
that's right. That's right. But regardless, fucking Wharf Talk, Dog Tooth, the hell, even the beat to What a Day, man, that little like vocal refrain, the What a Day.
That's Mad
Oh,
Lib, baby.
it's that's beautiful. It is a fantastic sort of denouement to an already great album that makes like if you include that, that's his longest album, and I seriously don't like I would not cut a single track. That's almost 80 minutes of music where every single moment of it feels like Tyler at his creative peak.
It flies. And yeah, it is him at his absolute creative peak in terms of making a whole album that feels like the occasional barnstormers that you get on some of the
Hmm.
previous stuff. It's a whole album. It's a marathon of success. It is a parade of an album.
Could not have put it better myself. But that said, Tyler at his creative peak. I think it's just sort of we can sort of dial it back now and sort of recognize that, like you said, we're in the midst of an all-timer run. We all know that, and so with the idea of new Tyler music on the horizon, you almost get nervous, because it's just like when every streak's got to end eventually. Like
Yeah, when's it gonna
Ty,
break?
Tyler's another comp that I've heard other people give out that I've always done with him just because of his knack for characters, for throwing different sort of concepts around, playing with sound as as flippantly as he can, or just like his strange embrace of being a queer icon is that Tyler's very analogous to David Bowie in a lot of ways. So you're wondering like when's the Berlin trilogy gonna be up, and when he's gonna make Tonight, or when he's gonna make something that is just like completely beyond the pale. And I was never worried that that was ever going to happen soon, but once Tyler broke his streak of not releasing an album every other year after Call Me If You Get Lost, so there was a strange feeling in the air after Tyler broke his streak of not releasing an album every other year, because it was like Tyler's a guy we don't really hear a lot from, other than the odd goofy IG story and what have you. So people were like, when's he going to drop something new? He hasn't even really been teasing much. And he's also been kind of hinting it's like he's a guy who's doing a lot of behind the scenes work, a lot of producing work. And also he's going to be involved in a couple of films that are coming up in the near future. And he's like, I remember he teased a couple of months ago, he's just like, I'm done with music. I'm going to be an actress. And, some people were just like, is how serious is he about that?
He was in
And
the
any
Pharrell movie.
That's right, the fucking the Lego Pharrell movie that definitely exists and is not a thing that I had a fever dream while I was in the hospital. Now we know how Kendrick Lamar's All Right became a
All
thing because of
right.
Legos. Okay. So he did do a song for that. I'm pretty sure one song. I don't remember. Oh wait, he was a teacher in that movie of Pharrell's. He was like a one-off voice role. I saw the
Yeah,
clip.
he doesn't play
Um,
himself. He has a little cameo as like a teacher at
nope.
Pharrell's.
And it's very obviously like you just hear that voice and like that is Tyler the Creator's voice. You can't mistake it for anyone else's, frankly, which I mean is just one of his signature stylings. But recently we got the sort of, I mean, like it was announced ahead of times, but I mean, like he was like, "Hey, this album's coming out in 2 weeks." The last time a hip hop album dropped like that was actually Brockhampton's Roadrunner, when they were just like, "Oh yeah, album's out at the end of next month," and people were like, "Oh shit, okay,
Right, you're
cool."
right.
And he dropped the single Noid with it, and with the announcement, and I heard Noid and was instantly like, I'm putting aside all of my expectations because the last album was a little bit more creatively safe for Tyler. So it's fair to assume that this might be on the weirder end of things, and I might get something that is like Igor and just like totally destroys my expectations, or is that might take an adjustment period to listen to. And I took a listen to Noid with my mind open, and by the end of the song, I was like, I have no idea how to feel about this, because Tyler, the Creator, just released a song that made me think of like Black Sabbath because of that fucking guitar riff, which, I mean, god damn, it's so good. The way that he's like woven rock instrumentals into his beats as he's gone on is nothing short of exemplary, and I feel like it's really well showcased here. And immediately you get something that you haven't gotten before, and that Tyler is displaying way more than his typical braggadocio, and also pulling back from the more conceptual storytelling, and is really more just talking about the fact that he really wants people to leave him the fuck alone. He's tired of being in the public eye. He's tired of being under a microscope, to the point where he feels like, like somebody who's in a movie, and like it makes me think of like it's Tyler as the protagonist of the clipping song Check the Lock, where he's
You got
consistently
me.
paranoid about
You know
literally
the
everything.
level that I'm on.
I knew that was a comparison that would instantly communicate my headspace to you. I had to go with it. But it communicates something we never seen from him before, and it's Tyler in a very reactive mode. But he still goes in an interesting place with this direction. Like this song is so like structurally formless and has like virtually no huge similarities to anything he's done. It's like it's Igor, but by way of Flower Boy. It's like it sounds familiar, but utilized in a way you haven't really been able to hear before. And He also said he was going to be dropping this on a Monday. New music usually drops on Friday, which ultimately proved very advantageous for him because this became a really successful album, most successful hip hop album of the year, I believe, thus far. I think dethroning Schoolboy Q, and Doichi, who I know also did very well, who we'll talk about in a minute. But so Tyler announces that the album is Chromacopia, and we get Chromacopia. And this album immediately is like recognized to be like, this is Tyler continuing his streak. We've got some solid songs here. We've got him sort of like maintaining his individual identity, but reinventing himself in a cool way. And the conversation around it sort of became like, what kind of album is this for Tyler? And I feel like everyone started comparing it to Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers by Kendrick pretty quickly. And at first I
Mm.
kind of dismissed this comparison as being a sort of surface level thing of just being like them just wanting to compare it to Kendrick because Kendrick's the biggest thing and obviously you want to connect the two somehow. But the more I listened to Chromacopia, the more I was like, yeah, no, there's something here. And this only further kind of developed for me after another album came out this year that I checked out. The one from Tyler's idol, Eminem's The Death of Slim Shady,
No
which
fucking way. I
let
didn't
me
listen to this,
let
so this is all
let
you.
me let me pause it here. The Death of Slim Shady is Eminem's attempt to make his Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. Which what is that? What is when a rapper makes their Mr. Morale album, what is that now? Their hip hop maturation record. It is them transitioning from a state of Peter Pan like adolescence in hip hop into someone with responsibilities that has a tangible effect on their music, on their ethos, and an effective sort of translation of a kind of lesson that they learn. And it does kind of feel like that is Tyler doing that thing that Kendrick did definitely do on Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. And Eminem also does feel like that was his attempt too, because of the two halves of his album being a sort of conceptual retread of his relationship with his persona, that being Slim Shady. And I feel like it's kind of just generally accepted that the concept on that album was not very well executed, but there's a lot there that does sort of feel like Eminem reckoning with his old self as his current self. That does feel almost like the journey that Tyler the Creator has taken, just a little less text and a bit more subtext. But I would say that it's just funny that we've gotten here after all these years, and that Tyler started as being very Eminem inspired, and now the student has just wholly eclipsed the master. The Padawan has defeated the Jedi, in this case, because I think that not only is this a fantastic maturation record that sort of surpasses that of Eminem's, which is kind of a flimsily held together thing that requires way too much context to even try to understand what it's doing. Whereas Chromacopia stands as itself, and in my opinion, is Tyler's best album. And the reason it is because it does two things. It does not abandon the tight conceptual framework that he often tries to put his albums within, because I mean, even Call Me If You Get Lost still has a very sort of like set dressy kind of like thing behind it. It's just an excuse to let go. Whereas Chromacopia is a bit more like Igor in the respect that it's very much trying to position itself as an examination of very specific ideas within a much looser narrative framework, but a narrative framework all the same. And this is an excuse for Tyler to discuss getting older and how that relates to his artistic persona and his innate artistic drive just as a creator, but also as somebody who does see himself as wanting to have a family, as wanting to have a child, even, and also reckoning with where his queerness places him in relationship to these ideas and how it distances him from some aspects of it, but also makes him bizarrely more prone to others, as well as the fact that he's obviously living this kind of bisexual polyamorous sort of escapade thing where he's not tying himself down to anyone, but at the same time
Yeah.
finds himself continually falling in love with new people who enter his life. So there's a sort of side to him of just like I love enjoying in my indulging in my hedonism, but also I do feel something more that's making it difficult for me to sort of tear myself away from it. So he's at a crossroads where he's like all of these things are pulling him in all these different directions, and now he also has the added element of being afraid of people, of trying to get away from everyone and live life on his own terms. And Chromacopia is an examination of every color of Tyler the Creator. It's him in his most mature, but also him at his most adolescent. It is a valley of contradictions. And as a valley of contradictions at the very center of this album, I think it is the most resonant thing he has ended up making.
Yeah, I mean, I've made gestures towards this before, but Tyler, with this album especially, has found a way to walk a really fine line between conceptualizing his own personal experiences and being very honest about his conflicting feelings about his own life in a way that
Hmm.
makes Chromacopia feel like his most soul-bearing work yet. You have the start, Saint Chroma, which is basically a continuation of the kinds of stories he was telling on Call Me If You Get Lost, right? Of like, I did this, I did that, I'm that guy, I've been that guy.
Hmm.
But then it immediately gets kind of thrown, well, not immediately. You have Ratata, which is a big continuation of that, which is a
I just
straight
gotta
up
say,
fucking Kronk anthem.
of all of Tyler's straight bangers, I think Ratata might be my favorite because it perfectly blends the like Tyler loves low end in his production style. He loves bass. It's thick, it's heavy, and it's here so much so that it just almost swallows the mix. But it's in combination with the fact that he's got these really high end synths, and he combines the low end and high end at their most extreme polarities, smashes them together, and then has just the most fucking knocking flow and beat at the same time. I couple thousand on me, 100,000 on me. Oh,
This is
it
what
is.
Cherry Bomb, this is the dream version of Cherry Bomb.
Yes,
You get it.
ex exactly. It is everything you want in the noisiest, most abrasive parts of Tyler's sound, but it also has the slickness. And it's to every like bit of like lyrical refrain on here. It's like it's so funny. Tyler's always been a really like interesting writer, even if he hasn't always been the most successful. But like ever since Flower Boy, I can't accentuate enough how thoughtful his writing does feel and how much funnier it is because like before he was very much just like haha I said a shocking and edgy thing, isn't that funny? And now it's just like he's fucking George Carlin in stand-up mode on this fucking album. There's so much to appreciate in even the briefest moments here that are so funny. Like ratatata, my favorite part is just the part that goes like where he drops the like he's doing his like normal cadence and he's like rapping in that kind of husky voice and he's like talking about tell those fellas and those women. He says like it sounds like another version of him comes in from out screen. He's like, and those women. He says it just as straight laced as humanly possible. The song, like the backbeat, like drops out for a second. It's so fucking funny. And like the whole first stretch of this is so immediately satisfying. Like I gotta shout it out to this album's secret weapon. Daniel Caesar's vocal harmonies.
Oh
Oh
my
my God, this
God.
man's soprano is gorgeous.
When that
Just fucking
snippet,
gorgeous.
we got a snippet of that song, basically
Hmm.
the first half before the beat drops, as the initial hint that this album is coming, complete with a
Can you see
insanely
the light that
evocative music
shine?
video that really sets the tone for this. Uh, but yeah, Daniel
Chromacopia.
Caesar is easily the star of this song. Before it also has a cherry bomb-esque explosion of bass that leads
So
us
much
that leads
fucking
us into
fun.
a so fun verse. I've never gotten that out
Wee,
of it.
wee,
I'm just a box with a
wee,
light of thunder in me, which is like a type of flow
wee.
that he's done. It's the same type of flow that he's done on Dogtooth, right? Where he's like,
Hmm.
My girl like anxiety beating Khalees. It's the same type of thing, but he's adapted it for this new context.
And it's so much fun. Like, and just again, like he's at his catchiest, his most immediate, but like the way that he just sort of segues into like, this is a kind of Tyler song that we've had before, and then naturally after that you get Noid, which is this, kind of rollicking doomy beat that's like, again, this is like as close to straight up like MF Doom homage as Tyler's ever gotten, but still within a context that's like, again, with an added bit of like Pharrell flavor and spice that's like all neo soul and cool. And like the second half is such a stark departure from that first one, sort of finally touching on that paranoia thing. And then you go to Darling I right afterwards, and this is pure sort of like Flower Boy, like you can tell that like this is the part of Frank Ocean's sound that has influenced Tyler the most, just because it's got that, sort of beautiful pop song quality, like the pink and white of this album, but like also just the sort of polyamory anthem that like he's hinted at this before, but it's like a really present element of this that he, has no specific sort of attachments at the very beginning here, that he's just like he's been talking about fucking whoever he wants to fuck, wherever he wants to fuck them. And it's kind of like it's setting it up as being like he's certainly gotten here after making some changes in his life, but it's also setting it up to ultimately be bulldozed by Hey Jane, which is where this album's arc truly begins. Which Hey Jane is a very
Mhm.
loaded title, just because something I didn't know is that Hey Jane is the name of an
It's a
abortion clinic
website.
in New York, or it
Yeah.
is it is a website that like allows you to like for like high profile people would use in order to aim to maintain to get a hold of like contraceptives or like plan B or that kind of stuff. And in this song, Tyler meets someone while he is, getting freaky with people, and ultimately has a pregnancy scare. And people online are talking about the probability of whether or not this is like real or not. And I'm just like, have you guys listened to a goddamn word this dude has said? Like,
Random disclaimer.
stop trying to play TMZ and figure out whether or not this is not the Drake beef is over. It's
Two
over.
songs ago, he was like, "Leave me alone," and now we're like,
Read a
"What's this
book.
about?"
That's my favorite, like one of my favorite sort of like throwaway lines on the album is just like,
Leave
people want
me
to talk about me,
alone.
read a book. But in Hey Jane, there's this story song where he talks about someone who he knocks up, and this is just such a really thoughtful way of interrogating this situation, where he is very much like the two adults in this story are adults, and they have like all the power in their situation. Like they both clearly have money to make whatever choice they want, and that's what the premise of the song is. It's them being like, the pressures of society or something that definitely weigh down on us, but ultimately we're two very individualistic, determined people, so we're going to make the choice for us that's, going to be the smartest. And, Tyler's talking about how, normally he's more careful than this and all that stuff. And also takes lengths to consider the woman's perspective in this, even before he starts rapping as her in the second half of the song. But in the like, I'm hearing Tyler, the creator of all people, be like, yo, I know you're gonna have to go through, such an ordeal if you choose to carry the kid. Like, it's gonna be emotionally hard on you, it's gonna be physically hard on you. And I'm just like, who the fuck is this fucking person?
Who is this
And
guy?
yeah, and then
That
she
one
comes
friend
in
who's too
afterwards
woke.
and anti-woke. Okay, okay. But they're two people who are really just sort of like discussing the gravity of their situation and what they're going to end up doing. And there is sort of a cyclical thing that Tyler gets at here, because this story is also the story of Tyler's parents, of his, mom and dad meeting on like more of a chance encounter, and then his mom choosing to have Tyler even though she didn't want his dad involved in their life, and to the point where she even says this on the album later. And Tyler's mom is kind of like a guiding voice that's like interjecting on several different songs here. But the what she says is often like you're as a listener, you don't really know how you're meant to feel about her interjections because a lot of what she says, like when she's like pushing him to have grandchildren and stuff, it's like the influence of his mom has clearly been a positive thing on Tyler that he's spoken about like multiple times on Call Me If You Get Lost and this. But also, we're seeing the parts of Tyler's mom's relationship with him that has maybe made him overcorrect in a few areas in his life that has led him down to where he is now, and maybe is responsible for a few more negative behaviors than positive ones. It's a pretty thorough examination of that topic, if you ask me. But like, I love the idea of sort of making this a repeat of just being like mentioning that like since Tyler had an absent father and sort of the lingering threat on this album being like, are you also going to be an absent father? And like they ultimately choose not to have the child, but Tyler does not abandon his feelings of like being like, but I still like I think I want to be a parent one day. Like I want that, but like do I? And he kind of gets a little flip-floppy on this part of the album as he's trying to decide what he's doing. And can I just say I love the fact that like he's not abandoned the fact that he's still kind of an edge lord, and that'll show up occasionally. And it definitely shows up on the transition of going from Hey Jane to I Killed You, which is Hey Jane is this really thoughtful examination of a situation. And then you can't escape the fact that it's like it's a song where the ultimate decision being made is that a pregnancy is terminated. And then you go straight into a song called I Killed You,
I
which is
killed
not
you.
about that, but is still about that. But in fact, it's
No.
actually a more interesting examination of Tyler's relationship with his own blackness, actually.
Yeah, I killed you. This was the one that really snuck up on me, and I feel like it's true for a lot of people of
Hmm.
like the subject of it doesn't initially become clear. And so once you kind of put it together, and it's not like Tyler's overtly hiding it, once it becomes
Hmm.
clear that he's addressing and talking to his pair as an
Hmm.
extension of himself, and there's a thing that he has to control, and there's a thing that he has a fraught relationship with, it becomes a really interesting exploration of like black masculinity. And so it makes sense that the production of this song is so influenced by like African drums and big
Hmm.
horn sections that feel like marches happening. And then you get this really beautiful segment at the end with some great vocals from Childish Gambino that
Yeah.
really eschews the concept and really shows where Tyler has ended up at, where Gambino's vocals are very much like, no, you're beautiful. You got
Mhm.
this. Do your thing. And it's very reassuring. It's a very interesting song. But man, when those horns come in, it goes
Oh,
crazy.
it's so good. And I feel I gotta play defense a little bit for the mid stretch of the album here, which is definitely like the most controversial part of the record musically, because I basically think that this album does nothing but bat straight 1,000, and that totally continues for Judge Judy, which I think gets
Yes.
shit just because the hook is so weird. But like, look, let me just I I listen to like Ween. I don't think that this is that weird of a song anymore. Like I feel like if
Right.
you listen to nothing but like, the Weekend and whatever three-letter name rapper of the week is currently doing it, then yeah, maybe this song sounds a little goofy to you. But like I don't know. I think the storytelling here is really underrated, especially the subversion that we get at the end, and that this is a sort of continuation of the whole like sexual liberation thing. And it's Tyler being like almost overly courteous to the point where it's like he's trying to make that part of his personality so that he seems more appealing to people, so that he's just like, don't worry, I'm not judgmental. And he's just like, he's saying he's not judgmental so he can get in people's pants. And it's like, yeah, we see what's going on here. And then at the very, very end of this, he gets a letter who is written from the source of this song, the judged Judy in question. And it turns out that she is dead because she passed away of a terminal illness, and she wanted to live life on her own terms, much like in a parallel to what Tyler is doing, and just did that, but now she's gone. And this causes Tyler to have a bit of a crisis of mortality, to throw that into everything that he's already dealing with, which makes the situation a bit sticky.
This is such a great country song, dude. Like when you were making that Ween comparison earlier, I was just like, no, this is a country song. Like this is a
Yes.
this is a not dumb. It's a silly story country song. Or, like I was thinking while we were talking about Hey Jane, I was thinking about like Red Rag Top, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like we used to be able to do this kind of thing with
It
our
it feels
genres.
it feels like a almost throwback, like a Southern hip hop bonanza. Like this song is outcast as fuck. You got Glorilla
Yeah.
and Sexy Red both on here, and man, they fucking kill it. They're both absolutely fantastic. Lil Wayne too, honestly, whenever he shows up on a Tyler project, I'm like, dude, where is this energy in your main shit right now? Like, goddamn. But like, Sticky is just, it is so much fun. And then once those horns come in, I'm sorry, this is the hypest shit in the world. Like, you
It's
can't
the song
convince
of
me
the
that this
year,
is not
dude. I
fun.
know it came late in the game, but this might be it.
It's getting sticky in
It's
this
up
bitch.
there. It's getting sticky.
It's so much fun. And I mean like it is also, it perfectly mirrors like where it is in the narrative as being like a part where he's like just trying to indulge in hedonism to forget about everything but ultimately can't. And then that transitions into the most emotionally resonant part of the album, which before I get to, I just want to say another thing about this record that I like is that it's very like Tyler's very intentionally obfuscating putting a label on himself in regards to his sexuality. Like it's pretty apparent that like he's some flavor of bi or pan or something of the like. But obviously, since he's Tyler, he's never gonna put a label on himself. But throughout this whole album, he's just like he'll just be like, I don't even like he goes like I don't even like girls, I'm gay, bitch. Like he'll just
All the
like
Bob bitches know the fuck is going down.
oh, dude, it's so good, but like it's almost like he does it to such a degree where it's like this feels like the most non-binary Tyler album because it's like he's rapping from the perspective of women all the time. He's talking about himself in female terms. He's like intentionally switching up pronouns. And even then when he mentions pronouns directly on the album, he's just like he's saying that he doesn't give a fuck about them, which is like at first you're like, oh, that's Tyler being edgy, but it's like it's also him saying he doesn't want to be put in a box, which is like again when you're me, when you're you, it's just like that makes my brain go brr.
Yeah,
But
and I mean
man, it's
that's the whole point of all of his music. And so of course it makes sense that it extends to his masculinity, like we talked about with I Killed You, and his, potential to become a father, become like his father.
and that's what leads into this next part of the album, which to me, this is maybe the best string of songs on any Tyler the Creator album. Just like we start off with Take Your Mask Off, which again, Daniel Caesar's on this one again, and he just makes it absolutely luminescent, like a beautiful sounding song, which is true for all of these. But like Take Your Mask Off is, if I can throw another Kendrick comparison, this is his Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst, where he embodies three different characters that all wrap around into the core thesis of what the album ends up being. He talks about, there's a one point where he raps from the perspective of a priest who is hiding his sexuality, a housewife who doesn't feel fulfilled by herself, and then ultimately he starts talking about a rapper who it's abundantly clear is Tyler. And it's just about embracing who you are. It's about shedding confines. It's about Tyler utilizing the fact that he does have more freedom than most people in order to navigate his life in the freest way possible, which is to be himself. It's a matter of fact expression, but it's like he's encouraging that in other people. And it's like the tell them black babies they can do what they want from the last album, but this is a hey, you know, the thing that is keeping you from being who you are, you're the one who holds that. Take it off so that you can like it's gonna hurt. It's gonna suck. Like it's not saying that like, you don't have $1 million. You're not like me, but you're gonna be better off for it. And I mean, he's right. And that's like that's like an important conversation to even have, just because like it's like when Kendrick started talking about how many how like there's a really big problem in the black community, specifically with the sexual abuse of like young black boys, just because it's something that like societally is easily able to swept under the rug because of our ideas and preconceptions about masculinity and femininity and being predatory, and how that is insulated in an environment like that. And that's more or less true here, the same thing of just like how many rappers have been where Tyler was, but they weren't able to make their Flower Boy. How many people are in the entertainment industry who are, trying to embrace another part of themselves, but capitalism, masculinity, or, something racially even is holding them back, something that is, imposed on them from something else. And it makes this lead in from Take Your Mask Off to Tomorrow be like, I mean, again, like the sun shines through the clouds and is just like it's a moment of real stark beauty on an album that's been very claustrophobic up until this point.
Yeah. Yeah, tomorrow. It's just a really great, quiet, contemplative moment that leads
Hmm.
into Thought I Was Dead, which is another great, like, it's a banger. It's pretty
Oh yeah,
simple, it's pretty
and
cut and dry, but
but
it's
also
very
really
dynamic in a way
it
that the
it
other bangers on here have not been.
it kind of sort of ties together a lot of the themes that Noid sort of tossed out there, and that it's like he's talking about, when he's out of the public eye, they think that you're dead. It's just like, hey, r/Tyler the Creator, this song's about you. Because it's like when he was living his best life, when he was doing better than he has been, everybody who was a fan of his was just like, drop the album, drop the new album, new music, King, new music, give us new music. And it's just like, I fucking like, do you all not want me to be doing better like you say you do? Or do you just want me to get into the, go back into the studio and crank out money for you because like I'm your trained monkey? Go fuck yourself. And it's like that's something too. Like as a JID fan, I'm fucking tired of people pushing that man to try and release music because it's like it's probably not his fault. His label probably has him in a shitty place. Like that's happened with like two members of like TDE in like the past month. And like we gotta, we gotta start having real conversations about how artists don't really have any control over the music that they end up releasing or making. And it's like it's sad that it takes somebody of Tyler's stature and success to be able to have their own sway over their own music. It's like he can release it on a Monday because he has the support, because he has the financial incentive to do so. But that is not the case, like it is with everybody. It's these are all problems that are not just affecting Tyler. These are industry-wide societal like issues that are still very much very big problems right now. And speaking of big problems, this one goes into Like Him, which this is sort of a reprisal of Tyler's relationship with his father, which we've only really gotten bits and pieces of since Wolf, honestly. That was a big aspect of Tyler's early music that kind of went away for a while, but this is like
Hmm.
assuring us almost that the specter of his absent father is basically haunting him. And like it's also the idea that like his mother's influence on him hasn't been wholly positive because she's kind of been imposing the expectations of his father on him. Like imagine what it must be like to be raised in an environment where someone is telling you that you look and act just like somebody that you've never met before, and that kind of cognitive dissonance that causes in you. And like again, if you got daddy issues or parent issues, this song is going to hit you like a ton of bricks. It's just like the idea of being compared to this person who you don't know, don't understand, or even if you do know or understand them, maybe you don't even fucking like them. And you still have to have them follow you. And then it's like, how does that feed back into how Tyler views himself and how Tyler might view his own child? It's just like, am I going to be a specter to my own kid? It's like that's a question he has to ask himself in order to be like, do I want kids? And the answer that he comes to is right now, no, because if I'm pursuing music, if I'm doing what I want to be doing creatively, then I'm just going to make another version of myself. I'm going to make another kid who's going to hate himself because his dad wasn't around.
Yeah, and I mean it ends with the question unanswered, which is the most important takeaway I think for any listener, which is that Tyler, it's not resolved. And like
No, because
that's the
how
tragedy of
could
it
it be?
all. Yeah, how could it
because
be? This is a
Tyler
lifelong,
is,
these are lifelong questions we're talking about.
in case you haven't picked up, Tyler is maybe one of our best examples of an artist being fluid, transitioning from one state to the next and becoming wholly different, but still having some core components that make him undeniably him. And I feel like what makes Chromacopia special is that it's the first time where it's like, no, adolescent Tyler's dead. Like he killed him a couple albums ago. Like this feels like a wholly new person who's finally here, who has remnants and lessons of the previous person, but ultimately the wisdom of unconventional wisdom, because it's in, he's navigating a lot of societal issues and pressures that are, relatively new in the grand scope of things. So his wisdom feels kind of juvenile, but it's like he still finds a way to be himself through all of it. That's kind of what Balloon ends up being. That Brockhampton-esque synth at the very start of that song is just like him being like, well, I'm gonna do what I want to do because that's what makes me me. And so as a result, he has a fucking bonanza with Doichi as they embody bisexual excellence on this song.
Let's fucking go. Those
Doichi
two are
talking about
so
how much she
great.
loves A cup titties.
Those two are
Oh,
so
she's
great.
so
And
good.
that little synth sample that goes throughout the whole track, it's so addictive.
It's fantastic. If you
And
don't
they
like it, you're
ride it
boring.
perfectly. And the little Uncle Luke samples throughout.
Oh,
It's
so
such a great
good.
it's such a great addition to the mix. It works for sicko mode. It works here.
And
Sometimes you
it's
just need that guy to show up and tell you to not fucking stop.
I have a bit of a theory as to why, like, this is definitely a naughtier, more difficult sort of mature album. So it's not a surprise to me that it's like of the recent streak of Tyler records, it is relatively on the lower end, like reception wise, of all the albums. And to me, I think that it's partially because this album is so horny that people don't know what to do with themselves. Like it's like I think that they talk about songs like Sticky and Balloon as being like low points because they're like the ones that have the most sexual content on them. And I'm like, but the sexual content is so imperative to what this album is and to who Tyler is. So it's very
Yeah.
strange for me that that's where we're deciding to draw the line in terms of just like these songs are just as narratively important, and Tyler's sexuality is just as important. As like, does it maybe just make you all a little bit too fucking uncomfortable? Like, are you just a little baby about it? Because I think you
I don't know
might
what
be.
you're talking about because listen, all the bad bitches on TikTok love both of these songs.
Hey, emphasis on the bad bitches. I'm talking about people who are on the internet and using Rate Your Music too much, so they are probably not included with said bad bitches. But some people are just like, ew, like some people are just like, Doichi said queef on this song, and I'm like, and it rules, you
Is that
fucking
not the fun?
loser.
And to those people, is that not the funniest thing you've ever heard in your
It's
life?
hysterical. Like Tyler's one of his biggest influences is fucking Lil Wayne. What do you think that dude raps about on his mixtapes? Like, are you like fucking dude?
The
Where do you think
liberate
we are?
the personal liberation has to extend to our most primal urges. Otherwise, what the fuck are we doing here, man?
I could not agree more. Like this is like one of the most fascinatingly intersectional albums that's come out since Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, frankly.
Right. Like it's got to be about sex for this concept to work in certain
Hmm.
ways. Like the ability to be a full individual, which let's not get into, oh boy, any large conversations we could be having about bodily autonomy lately, but come
I mean,
on,
this
like
album
get
just
it.
became about 40 times more prescient than all of its discussion topics, honestly. Which is why it was sort of reprising the idea of don't ta take your mask off with the closer, I hope you find your way home. It's like, to me, I interpret this as sort of the final sort of bit of messaging here is Tyler passing on lessons. Tyler, obviously, with the title as much, just wanting to pass on the lessons that he's learned because he wants not people to be like him, but to be an individual like he is, to think for themselves like he does, because that's what he's always promoted. But he's doing it in a way that's smarter, savvier, and just a hell of a lot more human, a hell of a lot more relatable. Like, yeah, I'm not Tyler the Creator. I don't have a bajillion dollars, and I'm not hopping around, hopping whoever, and fucking whoever I want, but at the end of the day, it's about responsibility. It's about artistic drive. It's about passion. It's about pursuing what you want to pursue versus what everyone tells you you should pursue, and at the cost of potentially everything in your life. And, it does mean something to hear this from, a queer black man who's made it. Like, Tyler, for his, many contradictions, flaws, hypocrisies, he is one of a kind. And when our entire artistic hegemony is based around so many people who dilute themselves into the least interesting version of themselves, that just means Tyler the Creator needs to be somebody we rally around and be like, look, we know this motherfucker isn't perfect, but my God, nobody is embracing being an artist in the most human way possible on this big of a scale. Is like, again, what does fucking he say on Ratata? Biggest shout out in the city next to Kenny. That's a fact now. Tyler and Kendrick Lamar are like the two most important artists in music right now.
Yeah, and I mean, it keeps itself from being a suffering from success type album
Yep.
by encouraging and inviting presence, right? In all the stuff that Tyler talks about struggling with, he does so in a way that feels like you can get it in that he wants you to see where he's coming from. He doesn't want to alienate himself. He wants people to listen to the way that he has the same anxieties that everybody else does. Not so he can be like capital R social media relatable, but so that he can
It
relate to us.
one of the best and most like sort of mask off moments is when Tyler, when he's criticizing himself, as that in that one song where he's sort of embodying different people and take your mask off. And he gets to himself and he talks about having a fashion line that is, super expensive and, is exactly what he wanted to make, but it's too expensive for his fans to be able to buy. So he thinks it's worthless. And it's like that kind of, it's like that's how we lost Kanye. It's like that dude got so into fashion that he basically just sort of tunneled into that myopia and then never got out. Whereas Tyler, he had the reticence to pull back from it and be like, I wanted to pursue this, but it's at the cost of, like if I can't give this to people, then what good is it? And that's the theme of Chromacopia. It's like if something is just mine, then it's useless, whether or not that's knowledge that you give to a child or lessons that you give your fan base or art that you give your fan base. It's about passing something on. It's about not just hoarding everything. I mean, it's obviously we're not, fucking comrade Tyler the Creator here, but it's all about how these things are transient and about how you have to connect with other people in order for them to be important in the first place. Which again,
Yeah.
when our biggest rap star in the world is constantly rapping about being alone and trying to numb pain and drugs and shit, it's like we need a counterpoint to that. We need self-motivated people. We need to react to ways like to things like humans do.
Yeah, and I mean that sentiment goes into why the album was released the way that it was. I mean, he had a post on social media that was like, "Don't lose sleep over something that's going to be there the next day. It's gonna
Hmm.
drop in the morning, so you wake up and you listen to it.
Hmm.
This is for
And
you."
to me it's his grandest statement yet. It's an album that relies on everything that came before it like so steadfastly, but also manages to be singular. Like I don't know where Tyler goes after this because I've never known where Tyler would ever go. Like he is one of the most unpredictable people in the business, to the point where like people are saying that like Chromacopia were just like, oh, this is, really similar to his other stuff. And I'm like, in like the broadest possible sense, maybe, but like half the songs on here don't sound anything like what he's like made beforehand. So it's just like maybe pull back and like, we don't have to figure out where Chromacopia like ranks immediately or whether or not it's perfect or whether or not it's just like live with this shit for a little while. Cause like it's a lot of messiness and there's a lot of different things going on in it, but it's, parse through it. Like Igor was fun to parse through, but it's a linear narrative. There's not a lot of like branching outward or peninsulas of ideas that you can just kind of sit and ruminate in. It's just like this is something that takes a little bit more time. And if Tyler has done anything from us, it's definitely earned our fucking patience at this point because I mean, fuck, man, I'll wait for anything as long
I'll
as it's
say,
this good.
what else can I ask from this guy?
No, I mean like
Honestly.
we've got labels trying to like crank people out of like, just trying to just suck onto artists as soon as they're actually able to and then just, toss them aside as soon as they don't have a double platinum album and I'm like just sitting here marveling at the success of hip hop's weirdest bisexual continually making strange albums with weird saturated synths and weird jazz chords and like talking about making stupid Judge Judy puns and it's like where else are you gonna get this? Where else are you gonna get this lad, this fucking weirdo of a man who gets on top of cars and a fucking does that lumberjack dance? God, I want to see him live so bad.
No, all this is to say, I mean, the whole reason we did this project is that we love Tyler the Creator. Jake and I have talked about his music for years. We're both big fans, but more importantly than that, we both are kind of in consensus that he is going to be one of our defining artists of our period of being alive.
Uh, Yep. I took a look at like my last FM Scrabbles to see like how many like comparatively speaking because like I have a weird internal rule where unless you're a band like Always or something like you need to have at least three or more albums that are like top tier to me for me to consider you a favorite artist and I was on the verge beforehand. I was just kind of like, Call Me If You Get Lost is definitely an all-timer up there with Igor and Flower Boy, but I need one more from Tyler. And I crossed over 1,000 streams with him the other day, and I was like, that's a sign. That's definitely a sign. And now I've got Chromacopia, and frankly, it is my favorite hip hop album of the year by a considerable distance. In fact, it's the one of three perfect scores I've given this year. And like, God bless it. I want more. Like, I can't believe, like, I mean, I can in retrospect, but like, I can't believe that like Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers is actually already proving to be an influential album. Like like because I just figured that no one would want to copy a risk like that. And now I've got like the two other biggest people in hip hop trying to sort of imitate that album's riz, and I'm like, that's yes, please. Can we do more of this?
Yeah, I mean, Tyler is so young that it feels bizarre to call him an elder statesman, but
Yeah,
doing this, he's been
he's
doing this shit for
33.
a while, man.
He's
And
33, like he's in his prime.
that just makes me excited to see where things will go from here.
Mm-hmm. Because it could be anywhere, literally. Like he is as unpredictable as somebody like Bowie, and sure, his reign will come to an end. But I mean, like, we're in the midst of his Berlin trilogy period, and we're just trying to soak in all the sun, as it were. I'm just, the world is scary. We need art, and it's nice to know that no matter how scary the world is, there are still people who are going to shine so bright that you can't ignore them.
Yeah. And like you and I, we love art. We love talking about art and
Mm-hmm.
just this is proof that we're dealing with somebody who's important. The fact that we feel like we can sit down and do this.
It's look, hip hop is always about bravado. It's about, wanting to be the best and like being the best. And it's like with Tyler, it's different. Like I'll listen to somebody else say, I'm number one, I'm the best, blah 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 blah. Tyler's the only one who can say it, and I'm just kind of like, I believe that he believes that he's right, which is not always the case. But I mean, like when you can become that level of authentic where it doesn't matter if it's just like I don't care if that man has $1 million in the bank or zero and he says he's the best and I'm sitting there listening to him, I believe him. He's correct, except when he's only the second, next to Kenny.
He can pay his
He-
respects just like everybody
him
else.
him even
That doesn't slow
admitting
him down
that
for a second.
Tyler admitting that Kendrick is in front of him is in of itself an insane act of humility that I did not anticipate. He was just like the second biggest shout out in that city next to Kenny, and I was just like, did you just unfavorably compare yourself to somebody else? Oh my God.
After the year that after the year that Kendrick has had, being able to compare yourself to him at all is kind of a flex, which is kind
I
of the
mean,
point.
people are already talking about like the whole, the big three concept and saying that, Tyler deserves to be there more than J. Cole, which I mean, like, yeah, I like Tyler a hell of a lot more than I like J. Cole. And now he's kind of in the place where financially he's doing, about as well as Cole is. But like, and as much as I want to agree with the spirit of putting him in the big three of like, in my heart, he absolutely is. But at the same time, Tyler's his own thing. Like again, he's like I compare him to Bowie before I would compare him to another like hip hop artist spiritually anyway. So like if anything, we just get to let him have his own lane and see him driving it. Damn. I guess we do an album ranking now.
You just said, let's not get too ahead of ourselves and rank the albums. But nah, let's
Well,
do
I
it.
meant
Fuck it.
yeah.
Fuck it. Let's do it.
Yeah. Let's
All right.
I'm just gonna go ahead and do mine in descending order. So number one, Chromacopia. Number two, Call Me If You Get Lost. Number three, Igor. Number four, Flower Boy. Number five, Wolf. Number six, Bastard. Number seven, Cherry Bomb. And a distant eight, Goblin.
All right. Here we go. Now I've thought about this for a while. But yeah, I think I'm with it. Number one is Chromacopia. Number two
Yeah.
is Igor. Number three, Call Me If You Get Lost. Number four, Flower Boy. Number five, Cherry Bomb. Number six, Wolf. Number seven, Bastard. Number eight, Goblin.
Chromacopia.
Chromacopia.
I just love the way they say words on that album, man. Just every time somebody says something, it's purely imitatable. That
When they bring
Doichi
that
scream,
leitmotif back, when they bring that leitmotif back during Sticky and it sounds like a fucking sorority chant, it's so
wham,
good.
wham, 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 wham.
All right,
It's getting
everybody.
sticky in this bitch.
That's
Tell
the end
us,
of our discography review. Tell us what you think about Chromacopia. Tell us your ranking
Chromacopia.
of Tyler the Creator albums below. And as always, rock on London, rock on Chicago, Chromacopia.
Chromacopia.